live. All right, folks. Okay. All right, are we live? Let me see. We may be live. Give me a second, folks. We're checking on the live status right here. Okay, I think there's a lot of internet stuff going on at the moment.
We are live.
Oh, we are? Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. So we are live, folks. What's up? Welcome to the actual Unified Platform Presidential debate, presentation, and town hall. You'll be getting to interact with us. That'll be pretty cool. Now, the fact of the matter is that right now, Nolan isn't here at the moment. Well, it is what it is. Sometimes people get caught up. But just so you know, I'll just do a quick word about Nolan, and then I'll have my own little intro, and then we'll get to today's session. So the thing is that Nolan actually, I met him when I was out helping Mark Saffman, who's actually a deaf-blind advocate, in front of by National Action Network, where actually he was waiting to talk to Melinda Katz, who was running for the district attorney here in Queens, New York. Now the thing is that Nolan actually has a letter from the DA's office, Conviction Integrity Unit, that says that the evidence used against him was faulty. In fact, there is a history of wrongdoing at the Queens District Attorney's Office, which caused the resignation of the previous DA. His name was Jack Ryan, I believe, or something like that. John Ryan, something like that, right? Yeah? He had to step down due to corruption charges. Now the thing is that the infrastructure that was still there, even though they removed one head, there was a whole policy called China walling at the Queens DA's office, where they would hide exculpatory information that would set people free. Now, Nolan says that someone named John Castellano, who's actually now the assistant DA, was personally involved in his victimization, but they could on only one person. But as we know, sometimes Trump calls it the swamp, right? Yeah, there's a whole industrial complex, and the not-for-industrial complex or whatever, right? Yeah, that exists, that needs to be cleared out, that needs to be held accountable. They changed one person, it's not changing anything. That whole culture still exists. They got rid of Harvey, Weinstein, and then what? A couple of months later, it was Matt Lauer, right? Yeah, they did not get rid of the culture of entitlement, of elitism. Now, right now, today, I told a friend, I don't know if I would wear this funny shirt, right? Yeah, right. It says that little girl was me. I don't know if you guys get this shirt, right? It's kind of out there. But now I know it might seem extreme, right? Yeah, it seems too extreme. But the fact of the matter is, this is going on in the third-party movement right now. Nick Brana has sexual charges against him, right? Yeah, which has been because of a culture of sexual entitlement that kind of went on over at the. I'm sorry, I don't hear the echo. Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, it is what it is. Yeah. So, look, there was a culture of entitlement and sexual access. Nick Brana is known for being called out on sexual assault charges. This is clearly made on Status Quo, but he's still working now for RFK Jr. This has been documented. So unfortunately, within the third-party space, people are not being held accountable, and also these candidates right here, some of them are from the Green Party, right? We deserve a chance to really have to be heard. And I know, like, Jill Stein and Cornel West, they're trying to run from a debate. That's pretty sad. Well, thanks to these cans for coming through. You know what I mean? Cornel West and Jill Stein were definitely invited, but they're not accessible. By the way, they're both ultra millionaires. Okay, it's time to listen to the little people today. We got some friends here and qualified people. I'm going to introduce my co-host for the presentation portion. If Muti shows up, I'm going to jump right out. But Brian, actually from an American Union, is here, very special friend of mine, and been working with me not only in the Yang Gang, but also in the People's Party. And the fact of the matter is that you never hear from state-elected leaders in these organizations. And this is very disturbing and strange. If this was happening in another country, you would ask questions and you would say this is not right. And you would see the parade of the celebrities for what it is. So, Brian, tell them qualifications and why you're my Actress of the Year for 2023, I believe, right?
Yeah, thanks, DGL7. Thanks for inviting me.
2022, I think. I forgot the year. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, my name is Brian. I'm a former state legislator from New Hampshire, and I'm the founder of the American Union. This is a national union of swing voters trying to collectively bargain for a better social contract. And I want to thank all three of our candidates for being here tonight. I know you guys all love America, and you all know that something's wrong in our country, and we've got to find a better way to work together to put things in order. And before we do introductions, I would like to invite everybody to The way we start off meetings with the American Union is by reciting the preamble to the Constitution as a reminder of what our duties are as Americans, our mission statement for the country. And hopefully you will see this here in just a second. I invite you to take yourselves off mute if you like and recite the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We, the people, that's our mission statement. The United States as a nation. Those are our goals, our duties, union, what we want to accomplish. And we're coming up short on many of those things. And so when we get into questions, I'd like to ask you what each of those duties means to you and sort of what your policies are that will help get us back on track. But let's go ahead and start with introductions. And I'm going to go around in the order you guys are on my screen. So Emmanuel Pastrick, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us about you, your campaign.
Like a couple minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. My name's Emmanuel Pastrick. I started my career as a professor at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I grew up in St. Louis. I was born in Nashville, grew up in St. Louis, and then I was at the University of Illinois. I've also spent little time on the East and West Coast, and my field is Asia, originally working on Japanese, Korean, and Chinese studies. I declared my candidacy as an independent in February, exactly 4 years ago, basically February 23rd of 2020, because it was clear to me that there was no possibility of a legitimate president. Neither Biden nor Trump would be legitimate presidents, legitimately elected because of the entire corrupt system. So I thought I could articulate an alternative to that, and I tried to do that. I didn't last in the United States. I had to leave within 2 weeks of the declaration, but while in Korea, I continued to give speeches and then published now my second book of speeches trying to address honestly for the American people what we face. And I'm honored to be here with Alan and Susan. And I want to say that I hope we're not trying to sell Pepsi-Cola or Coca-Cola. We're coming together to form I think a movement, and I'm looking forward to honored to be working with you, and looking forward to working with you to reestablish establish a more perfect union. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you for your introduction. Susan, would you like to go next? Just a couple minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, DJ Elf7 and Alan and Emmanuel. Is that correct? Okay. It's nice to be here, and also thank you, USA out there. Anybody watching? I'm glad that you're here. So yeah, I'm running for president. My name is Susan Buxer Lahaki, but I'm going for my presidency as Susan B. Lahaki because it's easier for everybody to say. Anyway, I'm going as a write-in currently, although that may change. I have to see what's going to happen, and you'll have to excuse me. I've been on the road today, so I'm kind of hot and sweaty, and it started out at, like 32 degrees this morning, and now it got up to 80 where I am. So I've been having a rough sort of on-the-road day, but I love it. I've seen a lot of Texas. That's where I am currently, and it's amazing state. There's so much beauty and so much space. So we have a lot of space for people, and yeah. So the economies can use people down here. So come on down to Texas. I can definitely say that's definite possibility. Anyway, my platform is actually called More Perfect Union, and one of the first things I want to do is election reform. Now, this started already back in 2022 when I was running for Congress. Actually in 2020, I ran for president, and I realized there was some sort of problem with the election system, but I didn't realize how bad it was until 2022. And then I stopped actually running for Congress, and I started suing my Secretary of State and the election division because registering to vote is unconstitutional. And as a person running for federal office, one of my things, and of course now as a presidential candidate, our oath is to defend the Constitution. And it states clearly in the 14th Amendment that no state has a right to force obstacles on our liberties. And exactly forcing U.S. citizens to register to vote, to have our vote counted, is a force obstacle. And we don't need it. There are plenty of lists out there, but the real problem is that's where all the fraud is. So that's my first thing that I'm working on. Then I'm working on, of course, setting up a new election as soon as possible, to like a proper one, a real one that's legitimate and not like what we've had. So the fact that all these politicians are still using this system and they know it's broken because I've been telling them for 2 years now, then they are the corrupt ones, sadly. So this is a huge problem. We are being run by illegal people in office. But then the next thing that I want to do once I'm really in office is it's time to pay mothers. We need apprenticeships for our kids, and I'm pro-abortion. Abortion is a operation that is needed throughout a woman's life. Men making all sorts of decisions about what women should and should not do. So that has to stop too. We have voices, I have a voice, and we need abortion. I've made a video on the abortions that I've had, and 2 were life-saving for me. If I was living in a state that banned abortion, I would be dead already. So this cannot be, and one of the first things I'm going to do is bans on abortion. So that's my my sort of platform. There's more to it, but that's the quick sort of scenario or the quick story about it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Susan. And Alan, would you tell us about yourself?
Well, thank you, Brian, and thanks everybody. Thanks for doing this, DJ Elf. I hope everybody out there will subscribe to his channel and help get this thing off the ground. My name is Alan Collins. Student loans brought me into the presidential race. I am the first activist in the country on the student loan issue. I wrote the first book to be critical of the federal student loan program. It's a catastrophe, and I'll say no more about student loans right now, but only to say that the only way I could see to solve this problem was to throw my hat in as a candidate for the president of the United States. I'm also very concerned with wealth disparity, very concerned with taxing the wealthy. The rest of my agenda is, quite frankly, I think a pretty smart mix of both conservative and liberal ideals, but we shall see in the hours to come. My website is collinsforpresident.com, by the way. So if you have student loans, certainly let everyone you know about that website, collinsforpresident.com.
Okay, great. Well, again, I would like to thank all 3 of you for being here tonight and for your willingness to serve the country and try and steer things back on track. So our first couple questions I'd like to ask, and as far as order questions, let's rotate, and everybody can take a turn going first as we go through. So I'm going to direct this first question to Susan, and then if you can follow it with Alan and Emmanuel. So our first duty in the Constitution is to establish justice. That's why we formed this more perfect union back at the end of the 18th century. Can you talk about what that means to establish justice, and do you feel the United States is doing a good job of establishing justice, and if not, what would you do as president to put us back on track?
Well, I think that we have too many things that are illegal. I think that being an adult means you get to choose things to do with your life. And I think we should make drugs non-criminal, or I don't know what one says, but yes, I think drugs should be available. But I think that we have to take the street part out of drugs, and we need to put them into like a motel setting, because my understanding is that a lot of these drugs that are out there, people use them to have a better sexual experience. So obviously a bedroom is probably needed. So maybe have them at a motel, and then there would be a doctor and a nurse on call, and they would prescribe you your drugs, whatever you want to do for the evening. And then you get a room and you enjoy yourself. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I think we have to take the criminality out of a lot of things, and drugs is just one of them. And then as far as justice goes, I think the Constitution, our U.S. Constitution, covers a lot of things, our rights. And we've made a lot of laws, or the states have infringed on those rights. And we need to start there. We need to have the states get rid of their infringements on everybody's constitutional right. I am a U.S. citizen. I also no longer need the 19th Amendment. I'm a citizen, just like you, just like every man in this room here. So I don't need a special amendment giving me permission to vote. I'm a citizen. So we are coming up on our 250th anniversary of our Constitution. And I think once I get through some of the things on my list, that we need to rewrite the Constitution. We don't need slavery in there anymore. We don't need anything about Indian reservations anymore. We can really rewrite. Women are citizens too. So it's time. It's just time to rewrite the whole thing, not change a lot of the policies, just update the language and take out certain parts that are no longer needed. And then from there, we can streamline all the different laws that are out there. There's so many frivolous laws about stupid things like, if it's already against the law to like torture an animal and kill it in real life, why do we need a special law that says you can't do that on the internet? It doesn't matter where it's done. It matters that it's done. And whoever did it needs to be prosecuted and put in jail. So, but Donald Trump, one of the first things he had to sign when he went into office back in 2016 was a law about it's a criminal act to torture an animal, make a video of it, and put it on the internet. Did we need that? Did we really need Congress and the Senate and the president to sign off on that? I mean, we're wasting our time. So we need to streamline. We need everybody to work a lot less. And I want to actually change and get rid of the House of Representatives and move the power to the people. I want people's voices heard. I want all of our voices, and everybody in the United States who's a citizen, I want to hear their voices too. Because right now, our representatives are not representing us. And so it has to begin there. And then it'll snowball outward. So that's my take on justice.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan. Alan? Alan, you're muted.
Thanks. And thanks for the question. Very, very broad question. I can go anywhere with it. I look for injustice. I formed a group called Student Loan Justice, for example. And the injustice I spotted in that example was the fact that in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, the founders call for a uniform system of bankruptcies. Nobody wants to file for bankruptcy. The founders called for uniform bankruptcy laws ahead of the power to declare war and raise an army. This has been stripped uniquely from federal and private student loans. So this is exactly the sort of lending tyranny that the founders suffered under at the hands of King George and his men. And I think the student loan catastrophe is precisely the sort of lending tyranny that they wanted to avoid. So that's the first injustice I would look at, but you don't have to look far to see many other forms of injustice. A vast over-incarceration in the country, economic injustice, which does happen. 45% of the residents of the city of Houston can't drive because they have suspended driver's licenses because they couldn't afford to pay their fines. And, that is a very much longer conversation. but it's not hard to spot injustices. And typically, you can find somewhere in legislation where there was typically a constitutional breach, whether it was a state constitution or our nation's federal constitution. Because I'm running for president, I'm obviously concerned with federal violations of the federal constitution. And so that's sort of the approach that I take. And I would just tell everybody out there that, you know, we are in a class war. Whatever you want to, whatever you feel about any other issues, you have to admit that the wealth disparity in this country is like nothing we've ever seen, including in, say, the 20s, 1929, just before the Great Depression. So we've got to deal with economic injustice, including what I've said and much more.
Great. Thank you very much, Alan. And Emmanuel?
Well, I want to thank Susan and Alan for touching on the critical aspects of justice and stress that we're working together here, which is essential for our effort. I want to just say I've given 3 speeches recently on justice, particularly as in the criminal system. I gave one speech on the execution by torture of Kenneth Smith in Alabama, which is a classic example of the slow drift into barbarism we see in the United States, which is typical of late empires. And I think a critical part of getting justice back is moving back to being a republic and away from the empire, which we could talk about at length, the way in which the British East India Company and then later Cecil Rhodes and others worked to bring the United States back into that British Empire that we declared our independence from. The second is the case of Joshua Schulte, who was one of the people involved in WikiLeaks, who released actually a relatively minor role, but helped to release all these documentation on state crimes in the United States, and was sentenced to 40 years in prison, longer than most murderers, for the action of seeking the truth and upholding the Constitution. And then finally talked about the case of Jennifer Crumbley in a very recent speech, who was sentenced to prison for responsibility for her son's involvement in a school shooting. It was an effort, a blatant effort, to bring into the United States Israel-style collective punishment, to say that if your family member or your friend does some crime, you can be punished for it. There has no precedent in the Constitution, but it is in fact part of what's happening in the Justice Department in general, which is this confluence between Israel and the United States and what's called lawfare, in which you use the law to suppress and oppress people, and of course the private prison system, in which Israel and the United States are sharing both know-how and investors, and the border, in which now the border with Mexico is being patrolled by drones and robots, by surveillance systems, which are the identical ones being used in Gaza, the West Bank, and actually being now introduced in your local mall and your office building. So justice really has to do with bringing accountability back to the justice system, to the Department of Justice, and peeling off, ending privatization. I'm sorry it talks so long, but I think a lot of it has to do with actually having a constitution and a government that follows the Constitution. And part of that means getting rid of this whole privatization scam, in which you outsource, whether it's to Oracle and Amazon, or whether it's to private prisons or private police units or other organizations, the functions which should be, the government should be small, but it should follow the Constitution, and it should be empowered, and it should not be outsourced to for-profit organizations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to all 3 of you. And I it is a very broad question, very broad topic, this question of justice. And I'd like to come back to something that each of you guys said. And so just a little bit more about the American Union. As a national union of swing voters, the goal is to crowdsource Congress to do the work that they're not doing and write our own legislative policy. And so for 2024, we developed a legislative package called the Trump-Biden Peace Plan, where as a union of swing voters, it just takes a small percentage nationwide to control the balance of power in Washington, D.C. And by using that leverage, we can unstick the gears of legislative machinery in Congress and persuade them to act before the election in exchange for our votes. And so part of this legislative package, Susan touched on one of these aspects, is ending the federal war on drugs. That this has been a huge driver of mass incarceration for decades now, disproportionately harming people of color. And Susan's already acknowledged that she would support ending the war on drugs, legalizing, taxing, regulating them. Not to say that drug use is harmless, but that criminalizing them does far more harm. And so I guess I'd like to hear from Alan and Emmanuel if you would also support ending the war on drugs, or what your strategy would be for instead. And Alan, if we could start with you.
Sure. So I am for the decriminalization of drugs. However, I may be a little bit of a throwback here. I am not so interested in seeing the legalization of drugs that are currently not legal. I think what we've seen with marijuana, and I fully support the state's right to make those decisions. I get very worried though when I hear about particularly state governments regulating, taxing, and otherwise creating a market that they oversee for drugs, because it's just, in my view, it's not good when, if everybody was to quit gambling, drinking, smoking, and doing drugs today, state governments across the country would be bankrupt. And what is that? I mean, is that like normalized mafia activity? I just think I have a big problem with the states muscling in on the business. So I guess you could say I'm kind of a throwback. I'm kind of a don't ask, don't tell guy. Yes, decriminalization certainly for users. But at the same time, the government promotion and profiteering on the system strikes me as being just yet another government racket.
So when you say decriminalization for users, so if somebody was selling drugs, you would still support incarcerating that person? Is that the...
Again, this is a don't ask, don't tell thing. I don't want to put too fine a point on it because, quite frankly, this is kind of down the list as far as I wouldn't even consider it to be a presidential priority of mine. But certainly large scale, like, truckloads of fentanyl moving between the states, I think those probably should be prosecutable crimes. But again, I don't want to pin myself down. Certainly not non-criminalization, emptying out the jails and prisons of existing convicts for what I consider to be a victimless crime of, possession, etc. Yep.
And just sorry, one more follow up here on that. Susan had spoken about the need to get the street part out of the street drugs, right? As you may know, we're losing more than 100,000 Americans every year to drug overdoses, in large part because people don't know what they're getting when they buy street drugs. And so a system of legalization and regulation would eliminate that uncertainty in large part. With that in mind, would you still oppose a market for legalization?
Well, we've seen how that plays out. We get the state governments, they're less interested in protecting the safety of the public and more interested in making a buck out of the deal. And I'm sorry, I just have a problem with that. I would be almost more happy to see it continue to be unregulated than to be regulated, taxed, and becoming a profit center for state governments.
Great, thank you very much. And Emmanuel, if you'd be willing to answer any or all of those points.
Well, let me first say, in terms of my campaign and going forward, that there are fields in which I'm not expert, in which my role would be to bring together thoughtful individuals and citizens as a whole to form a consensus on the issue. And the issue of what to do about drugs is not my expertise, so I would take that approach. However, I can make a few general statements on the issue of how I would approach the use of drugs and misuse of drugs. The first is that the distinction between drugs which are sold on the street and those which are sold by pharmaceutical companies or forced on people through hospitals, etc., is a false distinction. We have opium is used, and opiates by hospitals are prescribed by doctors, and some people are forced to take them as part of their routine by the medical system. So I think we should not make a false distinction between the different kinds of approach. And also, I would even put things like pornography and games, etc., which are used as addictive substances, in effect, as a way to manipulate the population in this category. So it's clear that there are extremely powerful elements, mainly multinational banks and pharmaceutical companies, who make an enormous amount of money off of drugs, often of an addictive nature, and they probably have their hands in the illegal drug trade as well. So I certainly wouldn't want to, get them off the hook for the way in which they manipulate and destroy the lives of citizens. The second thing is, I would say that it certainly would be within the realm of possibility to make it illegal or at least to that. I'm not for total freedom for everything to do whatever you feel like, and that at the minimum we have to set standards to say that it's not acceptable to act unethical, or at least to encourage ethical, moral behavior among citizens. So how you do that is something we can discuss, but obviously the promotion of drugs within the entertainment industry, within social media, within what our young children are watching, the way in which sexuality, which is of course part of this, has been commercialized and used as a way to sell products and manipulate people. This needs to be addressed. I would say, in a sense, it's like the gun control issue as well, which you didn't mention, but it's of course tied to this, that the essential issue is not to seize guns of citizens immediately, but rather to get rid of the culture of violence and the way in which gun manufacturers promote guns for profit first. That would be step number one, because you could have some people who have guns for legitimate reasons, and if you don't have this culture of violence promoted, then it would be much less dangerous. So I guess I hesitate to make a general sweeping statement about what drugs. I don't want to say. Clearly, I don't want to say that all drugs should be legal and anyone can use them as they see fit. However, it's clear that we're facing a privatized, criminalized pharmaceutical company system, both invisible and visible, which is using drugs as a way to manipulate and also to extract profit from the people, and that must end. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And Susan, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Sorry, trying to figure out how to unmute myself. So no, I think it's definitely needed. We have a lot of people in prisons today that are wrongfully or frivolously put in prison, and the drug issue is just one of the many. So I think it's a good place to start and get the people out, get them trained. One of my things is apprenticeship, so I'd like to get them out of prison, get them trained into a career, a trade of some sort, whether it be welding or working at a library or working at a hospital. I don't know, but get them trained, and then set up these motels where people can go and have a safe experience. Oftentimes, once people have a safe experience, then they're done. They've done it. They don't need to do it again. So, or maybe they do it just on their birthday or something, then it's something special. The other thing too is it's not only for sex, it's also for creativity. So a lot of poets and artists might want to do it. But if you have a doctor and nurses there, and maybe a psychiatrist too, in case something really happens, a lot of the drugs too were originally developed to help with psychiatric issues. So by giving this power back to the people, they can self-heal themselves, probably from childhood traumas and other traumas in their life. So it's a great way also sometimes to meditate. And I think we're doing an injustice currently in our system. We need to pull the rug out from under the drug dealers' feet, and out of the drug gangs and just the drug industry, the illegal drug industry. I mean, we also have to deal with the medical drug industry, but that's a whole nother story. But and I think it's a great way forward. Just make it all legal, set up these motels, and get people. We're adults. We should be. It's called freedom. It's called freedom to be an adult. Sorry. So that's it.
And Susan, under your model, do you see these as being government-run motels, or would these would be private?
I think they're going to have to be government-run, and the reason I say that is because one of the other things in my plan is we have in the First Amendment the freedom of speech, which is freedom of expression. And so, if it's a private company and they want to be prejudiced, they could be. They might say, I'm not serving anybody who isn't gay, and then nobody can go there, who's straight or who's whatever, in the wrong sex or something like that. So we have to have it government run, and when it's government run, then it's non-racist, non-sexist, it has to be for all, because the government is for the people, by the people, right? So yeah, I think it should stay in the government, and then the government can make some money too. Then what's wrong with the government and the states making money? We also have to build roads and hospitals and take care of the mentally ill and all sorts of things. So absolutely, it's a moneymaker.
Great, thank you very much. So I want to swing back to something Alan had said. And he brought up a really good point in the question of justice and the issue of economic justice. And it's really easy after the murder of George Floyd to think of our criminal justice system when we talk about justice. But economic justice is a really important part of our everyday life, where most of us, I think, probably go through a given month without worrying too much about being stopped by the police or being wrongfully accused or wrongfully incarcerated or anything like that. But most of us do face economic pressures during that month, perhaps worrying about how we're going to pay our rent or put food on the table, pay our bills, or any of these kind of things. So economic justice is a definite component. So Emmanuel, I guess we can start with you this time. What is your impression of how economic justice is working in the United States, and what sort of policies would you, as president, like to steer our country in a path that moves us closer towards establishing justice?
Right. Well, economic justice is obviously a critical part of the plan for a more perfect union. The question would be how we will do so, and that's, of course, it's always the rub is in the details. We know from history that if you empower certain parts of the bureaucracy with the authority to suddenly make the country more just in terms of distribution of wealth, that this power can be easily abused. And I think we have to be aware of that. And obviously the Constitution is clear on that point as well. I don't think the Constitution, by the way, is a perfect document. but I think it obviously is the best starting point when we're trying to form a consensus, because it defines what the government is. And if we want to start to change the government, we have to obviously start with the Constitution itself. First, return to it. In terms of economic justice, I would say the most critical part is access to capital. As you probably are aware now, if you try and start a little business and you go to the bank, they will refuse you. Basically, nobody who's below a couple $1 million in assets of some form or another can actually take a loan from banks anymore. And so banks service multinational corporations, and of course, they are able to displace all the mom and pop shops, whether it's with Walmart or Amazon. And they're also now buying up all real estate, making it from owners to renters. And so the first step towards economic justice would be to take on the multinational banks who are behind this all. And I think it's a relatively easy process. We have to just recognize first that these banks working together illegally, in most cases, with the Federal Reserve and the Department of the Treasury, have created somewhere between 20 and 30 trillion dollars for their use over the last 20 years through quantitative easing, COVID relief, and a variety of other economic stimulus packages, and that this is counterfeiting. They've made money up. If you or I printed up money and tried to pass it off, what would happen? Well, our assets would be seized and we'd be thrown in jail. So the question would be, what do we do with BlackRock or Goldman Sachs or State Street when they're engaged in counterfeiting using the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department? And I think my position is quite clear. We seize their assets. Now, what their assets are and who they are is not a simple matter, because presently most of the actual owners behind, say, Vanguard are hidden from sight, but it's not impossible to trace them down, and it's not impossible to take back those assets. So I would say that would be the first step, is to actually take control. And I have a whole series of articles and speeches. I have a whole 4 speeches called Money is No Mystery, which talks about how you actually take control of money, and that taking away the ability of the billionaires and the corporations to create their own money, which of course destroys your money, and use it to destroy local businesses and force people to rely, whether it's on Verizon, on Amazon, on Walmart, etc., that this really is the first step. I'm sorry to talk so long.
No, it's economic justice is a very broad issue as well. So if I understood you correctly, you want to restrict the ways that banks create money.
I would say that would be a first, step.
Yeah, and you want to try and minimize the concentrated wealth in big giant corporations. Is that whether by breaking them up or seizing them?
So, I mean, I guess the problem is that in order to create a more economically just society, we have to move assets around. I mean, obviously they're concentrated in the hands of a small number of people. So the question is, how do you do this? If you say, well, we're just going to have an economically, equal society, and we empower the federal government or some revolutionary party to just seize assets and make a more fair society, we know from what's happened in the past over the last 150 years that this doesn't always end so well, right? It tends to empower a dictatorial system and can be very destructive and actually create a new class of empowered people. So I'm advocating that, yes, actually, we do have to seize assets, but we have to do it in a constitutional way. And the constitutional way to do it is to say that the people who have these trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in assets, that they have those hundreds of billions of assets because, 1, they created money through counterfeit. 2, they pushed the COVID-19 agenda, which was all illegal, that these are all felony offenses. And so the easiest way to start getting some economic justice is to say that if you're, the Walton family or the DuPont family or the Rockefeller family or the House of Saud or whatever, and you used these trusts behind multinational investment banks and private equity to destroy the local economy and to, make hundreds of billions of dollars of assets for you, that you should be treated in the same way that, Alan or Susan or I would be treated if we were engaged in such activities. And that's pretty clear, according to law. That is to say, we'd go to jail and our assets would be seized. So that would create enormous degree of economic equality in the United States very rapidly if we just follow the law and apply it to everybody. Currently, it doesn't apply. Essentially, if you're in the billionaire class, or even hundreds of, they call it bricks, right? 100 million, 5 or 6 bricks, then the law doesn't apply to you anymore.
Yes, that's Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Institute, right? Likes to say that you're better off being rich and guilty than poor and innocent in our criminal justice system. You can sort of get as much access to justice as your money can buy. All right, Susan, can you touch on how you address economic injustice?
Well, what I noticed is, first thing I suppose is once you get to a certain wealthy point, you don't need a salary anymore. So then there's no income. So then there's no income tax. So perhaps some sort of a wealth tax is needed. It's what we don't have in this country. The other part of that is I noticed also too with Social Security, there's it goes up with salaries, and then at some point it levels off. And then depending if you get a higher salary, 5 million or something, you'd pay the same as if you were only earning $1 million into Social Security. But that shouldn't be, because it's Social Security. It's for the social part of our society. So it's for all. So a $5 million a year salesman should pay his share or her share of the Social Security tax in line with the increase as it goes up. So I think, there was a time in our history where very rich people were taxed at 70, 80%, I believe. Even more. Okay. Well, so, I don't want to go so high. That's, I don't want to scare everybody. But I think right now, the highest tax bracket is 37%. And that's also quite a bit. But it only works on income. And if you have a certain amount of money in the bank, you don't need an income anymore. And that's where the discrepancy falls. So we need some sort of a wealth tax. On the other hand, maybe we should start encouraging these wealthy people who got lucky in their system. Not everybody can create an iPhone, but somebody did, and, they got to be a billionaire, right? So, it's also luck of the draw sometimes, but if they would spend money in their community and around the country and build things like they once did, some of the old rich people, from past history have improved our country in various ways. So I would encourage that as well. But I think one thing is we need to get people out of poverty. And the majority of the people in poverty are women. And I'm going to say mothers. And this is where mother's pay comes in. We got to get mothers off of the poverty level, and bring children up too. And we have so many different military and weapons and security jobs. And most of those go to men because you're not mothers, right? So, yeah. And so, we got NSA, FBI, CIA, we got sheriff, police, and I mean, the list just goes on. Then we got, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Homeland Security, and just, so there's tons of money for men. Where's the money for women? It's time to pay mothers. We also need them paid because this is exactly where our society has fallen apart. We've lost the family, we've lost the home, and our children are lost. So as soon as we start paying mothers a good salary to stay home and raise their children, we will see instantly, within 6 months, a difference in our society already. In a year, we're going to hardly remember what we used to do to families and to mothers and to children. I mean, we start hurting our children pretty much right from the time they're born, and then it goes into student loans, I mean, can we hurt our children more? I just don't think we can. So it's time to stop this and pay mothers. And then I also want to pay dads, because I do like dads. And I want to pay dads to have one day off a week where they can be a dad for that day. Take their kids somewhere, go to the amusement park, go to the ballpark, and have a dad and child day. So family is so important. And we're hurting our children. We're making teenagers raise teenagers, and that's where we get the bullying and the suicides and the drugs. And if we just start there, so many of our problems will go away. So we start there, bringing mothers home. Then the second, so I'm doing a 1-2 punch. So it's mothers home, okay, and dad's day off. But then it's also kids start in an apprenticeship program. With 15, they start learning how to work and how to be a productive citizen. Because right now, they're staying at home and they're playing video games and they're not learning a thing. Or they're learning how to shoot people. They're getting training, to be mass shooters. So we need to stop that. We need to keep them busy. We need to get them into an apprenticeship program where they can learn to be a nurse, or they can learn to be a mechanic, or they can learn to be a lawyer. Naturally, it doesn't end with 3 years of apprenticeship program and some schooling, because some things will need to be, get further education, but we need to start there. So abolish high school. All children will go to an apprenticeship and learn a trade, something useful. And when they're done at 18, they have a prom and they have a ceremony and they graduate and become adults in our society. And then they can go on to higher education if they want. But again, we have to start with the basics. We have to start at the beginning, and we have to teach our children also how to become an adult, because that's what they're not getting. So that's my economic justice plan.
And I think, as every parent knows, raising kids is definitely work. And I think there's a lot to be said for valuing it as work, recognizing that how much it contributes, raising healthy, productive children, how much that contributes to the quality of life for everyone.
That's right. And I will say that this is not just free money. There will be training involved, and I would like a community center in every town where the moms and dads can get together, do classes, also have the kids play together, where they can communicate and trade knowledge about, breastfeeding and birthing and just all the things that come with being, to having a child, to raising a child, also discussions about handicapped children or whatever, just covering all topics in every little town so that everybody knows what they're doing.
Great. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
All right. Alan, would you like to expand on that? I saw Susan kind of gave you the lead with talking about student debt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably should start with student loans. One of the greatest economic injustices are federal student loans. People going to vocational schools, truck driving schools, they are being ruined by student loans along with everybody else. 100% of everybody who gets a federal student loan has to prove they are financially needy in order to get the loans. And as we're speaking today, 80% of all federal student loan borrowers are unable to even make payments on their loans. So this sucker is done. And, this all comes back to the removal of bankruptcy rights, which have weaponized the loans, turned them into viciously predatory lending instruments, and have caused a hyperinflation in the price of college, the lending system is done. The loans have got to be canceled. That's my first big step. And I would call that economic justice, certainly. But maybe even more interesting for my campaign is that, I hearken back to the glory days of this country, like 1945. We're winning World War II, right? What does FDR do? And the White House and Congress and the swamp, the establishment of Washington, they raised top tier income tax rates to over 90%. It was about 94% for the wealthiest in the country. They also reduced government spending significantly, but let's just talk about the first thing for now. 18 years after 1945 were these tax brackets in place for the wealthiest among us. We need to return to that. If you look at our national debt compared to our GDP, it's exactly the same curve today from, say, 2000 to 2025. It's the very same curve as from 1920 to 1945. And so, history is screaming out, yes, we must tax the wealthy. But, Susan points out some interesting and true things. It's not just income, it's wealth. We have to, the highest 1% earners in this country, the wealthiest 1%, they own $38 trillion in assets. That's enough to pay the national debt right there. I'm not proposing that we do that. I'm not looking to confiscate, to pull a Fidel Castro on them necessarily, but we have to hearken from history's lessons, hearken back to history's lessons. A wealth tax, getting rid of the Social Security income cap for paying into Social Security is a no-brainer. Why have we not done that? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because the wealthy in this country, the elites, have captured and corrupted through the two major parties, the D's and the R's, our politics, our policy, and our economic future. And we cannot have that. So I would go there as well. The third thing, and I could probably go on, but I'll keep this my last point. $15 an hour, a minimum wage, that was 15 years ago, if not 20 years ago. We need to actually fight for a federal minimum wage of at least 21, if not $22 an hour. And I mean, actually get there. I would probably fight for 25 at this point. That's economic justice. That's where it begins. And by the way, how did the economy do after 1945? Between 1945 and, let's say, Nixon, 1972 or so, the economy thrived like nothing we've ever seen before in our nation's history. So don't believe the wealthy elites and their sycophants that try and tell you that, taxing them at more historically appropriate levels is going to wreck the economy. The opposite is true.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, everybody's raising more good points there. That wealth inequality, income inequality distorts the economy. That when as Emmanuel's kind of saying, when you got these big giant blocks of wealth, it makes it easier for them to buy up all sorts of things.
That's exactly right. And just my last point: if we're taxing all of the wealthy people at the same rates, then nothing's gonna. I mean, they're gonna be fine because their competition is getting taken from in proportion. So, yeah.
And to Susan's point about the Social Security cap, in 2024, it's $168,600 a year. So you pay into Social Security up to that amount, and then after that, you stop. And so one of the pieces of the Trump-Biden peace plan legislative package is lifting that cap, raising it to $420,000 a year, making sure that as people are earning more, that they're also still paying to help keep Social Security solvent. So swinging back to our to justice, maybe we can do this last round on justice a little quicker. But Emmanuel, you talked about two things. One was eliminating the private prisons, the privatization of prison services, but you also talked about shrinking government and making it do less. And so I guess I'm curious, how do you reconcile those two things, privatization versus small government?
Right. Well, thank you. And I'm sorry I wasn't more articulate there. I think, in a relative sense, government would increase in size over what it is now. The long-term goal, obviously, is to have smaller government, but smaller government would be based upon the assumption that local communities would play the role that government is now playing, that you would have a participatory local community that would be able to govern itself. And that would be the ideal. I think that's really what we see actually back with the founding fathers. What we have now is this system in which we have government, this corrupt bureaucracy, and then the alternative, which is presented to us in the media, which is controlled in itself, is the private sector. The private sector is going to be an alternative to government. But in fact, this is a smoke and mirrors trick. The private sector, corporations, are government. It's another form of government. It's more oppressive. It's more opaque. It's not subject to the Constitution, but they are essentially government in itself. And so the public-private partnership is an effort to make government and the corporate essentially one, and to create an opaque, unaccountable system of government in which the decisions are made basically by the advisory teams for investment banks and billionaires. Ultimately, government will be smaller, but the first step is to have a government which follows the Constitution, is accountable to the people, and can say no to billionaires. We have this case has come up with, I guess, Elon Musk, and there was a case in which I think it was Starlink, the Starlink system, where an employee of the Department of Defense made some statement like, we can't comment upon Starlink and missile defense unless we get we have to consult with Elon Musk first, right? I.e., the government is trumped by billionaires. There's another sort of elite class above them. I'm less concerned with the relative size of government, but first is the government would serve the people and that it would follow the Constitution and ethical principles.
Great, thank you. Susan, anything you'd like to add on the role of privatization in government?
Well, yeah. So for me, I have a distinction between the two, especially with the First Amendment. So I think our First Amendment says that we have the freedom of expression and the freedom of speech, and therefore private companies can sort of do what they want. And if they want to be prejudiced, they can. As long as they don't hurt people, that's up to them. But with that said, government establishments, so federal and state, need to be non-biased, non-prejudiced, they have to accept everybody. And so they should be also free from religion and free from any prejudice things, so that everyone can go there. So like if I have a bakery in a town that's that's private, that somebody owns, they can cater to, again, only Black people, will say. And then, or if in that same town there's a restaurant that is run by the government or subsidized by the government, they will have to serve everybody. So it doesn't matter who walks in the door, they have to serve everybody. Otherwise, they lose that funding, they lose that support, and they lose that ability to call themselves what they are. So that's part of it. But as far as making our country smaller, streamlined, I think we definitely need to do that. We've been around for almost 250 years now, so we don't need new laws, like I said before. We definitely don't need so many people in office because we're just paying salaries and bank accounts, and we just don't have to do that. We don't need new laws. the Constitution of the United States has a lot of information. And when I say the Constitution, I also mean the Bill of Rights and all the amendments. So, I'm personally going through each amendment right now as my platform and discussing each one and having everybody think about what that means. So we have a lot there. And then the states, I've discovered actually, as I look closer at our government, the states have they've bulked up. They've got so many laws and restrictions and all sorts of things. And so we're actually not top heavy. We're more bottom heavy. And so, the states need to look at their books and their issues. But the problem is we have a lot of illegal people in office who got there illegally, who are keeping everything in place illegally. So we first got to get the corruption out. Nothing will change until we do that. And so we need to start there. And then after that, then we can hopefully see a real change in our government and streamline it and get things to a reasonable level on every level. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks. And I see my co-moderator Muti has joined us. And Alan, you real quick, you want to add anything on that? And then Muti, I guess we'll open up for you to introduce yourself and ask the panelists whatever questions you like. And Emmanuel's got his hand up too. He's got a quick question. Maybe he's typing.
Yeah, I'll quickly just say, neoliberal corporate capture of our government is why I am here tonight. Sally Mae is the poster child of maybe a well-intended government program being farmed out to private industry and being completely wrecked and ruined and turned into something exactly the opposite from the public benefit interest that was intended. Be very careful about, anytime you see Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg go to Washington, D.C., be very afraid because they're bringing with them regulation proposals that they wrote. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there at that, but just beware.
And Emmanuel, you had something quick you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that we're all, Susan and Alan and I are all working together, but it's clear there are some differences here, and I wanted to highlight a little bit of the differences regarding the private sector. So my position on this would be one, that multinational corporations, which have their headquarters for legal tax purposes in the Cayman Islands or the city of London or Bermuda, are not American in any sense, and they have no rights. They are not allowed to lobby in the United States. They're not allowed to bribe people in any way. And the only thing that the United States government recognizes the Constitution is citizens. And that this is true for corporations in general. Corporations cannot play any role. And it extends to political parties. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party are not in the Constitution. They have no authority in government. But we have a system set up now in which policy is formulated within the Democratic and Republican Party, together with lobbyists and representatives of investment banks and multinational corporations. This is blatantly illegal. So I guess I take a more radical position in the sense that in accord with the Constitution, in accord with common sense, in accord with justice and basic ethics, we are empowered to seize the assets of these multinational corporations and investment banks who pushed through massive fraud in the Department of Defense, who pushed through COVID relief and quantitative easing, all totally illegal, massive theft of $20-30 trillion, and who are using the Department of Defense to money launder and steal from the American taxpayer. So I guess I'm taking a slightly more beefed up approach to say, let's first seize these 15, 20, $30 trillion and redistribute it because we're entitled to in accord with the law and with the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Muti, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself and ask our guests any questions?
Welcome, Brian. My name is Muti Ajamu-Osagboro. and I'm calling you live and direct from Uptown, Philadelphia. Just one quick question to Emmanuel. I don't know if this is an issue of semantics, but I think you stated something past. You said that the Republican and Democratic Party is not in the Constitution. Well, I don't know if you're saying the parties per se, or are you talking about mentions of the party? Because if you well read on the Constitution, that the Constitution says each state will have a Republican form of government.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the question, and I'm sorry I wasn't clear. Obviously, I'm a strong believer in Republican governance, and I'm not for pure democracy, in the sense that if you have a democracy in which you don't have a system for due process, that democracies are easily manipulated and misused. What I meant to say is this, that currently, and really it's been over the last 100 years, but gotten much worse in the last 20 years, the Republican Party and Democratic Party is where policy is made. It's first made within the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party in a closed black box. And then once policy is made, after they've consulted with insurance companies and banks and multinational corporations, then they present it to you and they vote on it. Usually there's no time between presenting it and voting on it. And that this system, essentially governance is being done within these political parties. And what I was saying is the Constitution itself doesn't say you can't have political parties or assemblies. It describes the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branches. It doesn't say anything about Democratic Party or Republican Party, i.e., they're not authorized to make policy. Policy must be made in a transparent and self-evident manner within the Congress and within the executive branch of government. Does that make sense, Muti?
Couldn't one argue, based on your articulation, argue policy is not in the Constitution?
That the formulation of Constitution, a policy is not described in the Constitution, you're saying?
Yes.
So it's an interesting approach, and I did not prepare for that question, so I don't want to say anything irresponsible, but you could make that argument that the Constitution is primarily about process. But I would say, my response, I guess, off the top of my head would be that essentially today, governance is carried out within the Republican and Democratic parties, and that the government itself has ceased to play that role, and that this is blatantly unconstitutional. The question of what our ideal would be for how policy should be formulated is something that I don't want to declare. I would welcome a discussion with you and others present to come up with what our position should be as to how policy should be formulated. But how it should not be formulated is by consulting firms working for multinational corporations and banks who feed it to the Democratic and Republican parties, slightly, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola flavor, and then feed it to us through the Congress. That this is blatantly unconstitutional.
Okay, well, let's ask, this is for the whole panel. In light of what you just stated, how would, if at all, the term that the Constitution clearly enumerates, the term Republican form of government, how would that play into quote unquote party or non-party? That's a question for any.
Well, I would just say I think that's kind of a dual meaning there. A Republican form of government versus the Republican Party. The second thing, the Republican Party, that's really just a brand name, kind of a trademark. I think Emmanuel's point is just that nowhere in the Constitution is the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or the Tory Party or the Whig Party or the Know Nothing Party. Those things are not mentioned anywhere. And the fact that these two parties are today, and who knows, might be two different parties 50 years from now, the point that these two parties are controlling everything is in my view, a grave threat to this country. You know, the Democrats and the Republicans control who gets on the ballot, for example, in all states. And here we are. I kind of doubt that anybody here, the way things are going, will see their names on the ballot, although hopefully I'm wrong. And this is not a result of, you know, any sort of consensus debate. This is a result of two parties shutting everybody else out. So now, one thing we need to realize also is that only 1.4% of our population in a presidential election year actually donate to either the Democrats or the Republicans or their candidates. That's like 4 million people are deciding the fate, controlling the policy and the politics of 330 million people. Something's very dangerously wrong there.
Interesting. Question. What about the you talked about, you know, the notion of finance reform or election reform. What do you think about that? Dark money and so forth and so on. Doesn't matter. Anybody can take it. It's a free ball.
I kind of wanted to answer the Republican question.
Shoot.
So for me, the term I didn't study politics, so but my understanding is what was originally implied in the term a Republican government and how we currently use that are not quite the same. But I believe it means that putting the power in the hands of a few people rather than in everybody's hands. But I've lived 20 years in Switzerland, and I've seen that giving the power to the people is a good solution. Still using a Republican form of government, but with certain votes going to the people. Switzerland's a country that's been around for 800 years plus. And so they don't need a lot of extra laws being created. And so they've given new issues to the people to make their own decisions. And it's working. And this is what I would like to see with our own country. I don't think we need a House of Representatives anymore. Most of those people, they get in office and then they spend the whole time voting whatever way their party votes, whether they're Democrat or Republican, and then the rest of the time they're campaigning again as soon as they get into office. So it's 2 years is too short to always be campaigning, and they get an amazing salary too to do that. So we don't need a House of Representatives. I want to give that power to the people. I want to send all of us a information packet on new laws that are being proposed 3 times a year. And you'll have 2 months. 1 month you can use to listen to stories about it, so the Senate and other political people will talk about the issues. And then you can also do your own research. And then you sit down and you vote. Now, in Switzerland, when we would vote, when I was living there and I was in my family, we would sit down at the breakfast table together and we would discuss the issues, and then we would vote, and then we would take our votes down to the town hall. And it's a great way to build family too. My whole platform is really about bringing back family and bringing the power back to the people, to us, to all of us. Not just the big powerful people, but still leaving the Senate as is, and leaving the executive position as is, and the judicial system. We don't need more judges. We have enough. So I think we don't need the House of Representatives. And I believe that should also work on the same level in the states too. They also don't need the legislative branch. So the senators can be the ones to write up the laws and prepare the information for the rest of us. And they can give us their ideas and their tips. And then we can make our own decision at home and bring it in. We have then a month to drop it off at the town hall. Everybody has a way to get to a town hall, and you drop it off and you're done. You have to show an ID, say, hey, this is my vote. And then also what will be included once a year is a election vote. So on whether you're voting on your judges and your sheriffs, or whether you're voting on your president and your senators, that will also be included in those votes. So 3 times a year, I want to give the power to the people and have you guys vote directly. Because right now, as we have all discussed, the Democrats and Republicans are not voting for us anymore. They're not listening. They have their own agenda, and it's not ours. And now we're in this mess of a country that we've got, and we have to clean it up. And this is the best way. I think the other part is, people are frustrated because they're not being heard. So this is a way then you have nobody to blame but yourself too. You can't point your finger and say, it's because of you. It's because of you. It's because of you, So anyway, I think this is it still has a slight Republican side to it. But again, also, I would like to rewrite a little bit our document. It's time. We're going to be 250 years old. And so, maybe we want to change that term, but I'm not a professional politician. So I don't really know what that word means, truthfully. So thank you for listening.
Okay, now let's go back a little bit. In terms of the framers of the Constitution, if you read the Federalist Papers, I think it was Jefferson that talked about the purpose of setting up the form of government that they have in America is to stop the ascendancy of corporations. So if we understand the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, etc., we understand that they are in fact corporations. So what do we say in regards to the framers' original intent?
Well, I think this is exactly what they had. This was their nightmare scenario. We have 2 parties that took over the country about 120 years ago, and they've been in charge ever since. And they're flip-flopping every once in a while. One is more in power than the other, and sadly, it has this sort of Christian roots to it. There was a movement. So exactly how Israel became Israel is part of it too. And so we have to first remove religion from our government. We got to get rid of "In God We Trust." I suggest changing it to "In Good We Trust," because if we give people a good idea to go towards, then we go towards it. So "In good we trust," not "in God we trust," because I'm an atheist. I don't trust in God. And anybody who believes in an imaginary person, I'm sorry, it's an imaginary person. So I'm a realist, and I believe in good. That's what I believe in. So I think, where was I? Oh, I forgot my train of thought. But anyway, we need to also maybe not look so much at the founding fathers anymore. They had slaves. They did all sorts of nasty things to the Indians, to women too. I mean, and probably to each other. So, maybe we should stop glorifying them as well and start becoming our own people.
Okay. Manuel, you had something to say?
I just want to talk a little bit about the issue of imperialism. And so I would say the Founding Fathers Constitution was imperfect, but there is some value in it, in that it was the first step in opposing the imperialist system. So I think it's helpful to understand what happened then and what's happening now, because there's a parallel. The main player in the United States that the rebellion was against was the British East India Company, which is the equivalent of what we look at today. So the British East India Company was a combination between unaccountable bankers with a privatized private mercenary force, which was combined with government. And this is what drew, for example, the Opium Wars. So these governments, these corporations were able to use the military to force people to buy their drugs, or to punish them if they didn't buy them, and also to make profits from the drugs. And this the idea was to create a republic, not and be independent from this British Empire. Sadly, in the late 19th century, under a series of efforts, Cecil Rhodes being the central figure, but there's a whole bunch of these people. They brought, especially the First World War, the United States back into this special relationship with Britain, which meant essentially being reabsorbed into the empire. And what did that mean? It meant that things like the British East India Company, in the new form called Ford Motors or Standard Oil, were back. And just like the East India Company, they had their own private military, which became essentially the MI6 and CIA, which did their bidding. And they formed an unaccountable, privatized government. So there's government for the people in our agrarian economy, but there's another government up there which is only responsible to the extremely rich. So this is classic imperialism. And the sad thing is that these candidates, even alternative candidates, are not able to address the crime of imperialism directly and how it affects ordinary citizens by drawing us into this war economy. And the United States is sadly addicted to war, addicted to oil, addicted to war. We're forced into these. And finally, I'll just say in closing that the whole free trade scam is related to the addiction to war. So it's your local economy, say in Texas or in New York. The factories that used to make things that actually people used have all been moved to Thailand or China or Mexico or somewhere else. And the only factories left are those that manufacture military goods and military equipment. That means that even progressive or revolutionary politicians have no choice but to buy in and follow the orders from the Pentagon, because the only real jobs in their district are somehow related to the endless wars. Thank you.
Are you familiar with the work of General Smedley Butler, War's Racket, where he talks about as a soldier raised into the rank of the Marines, that the military was basically muscle man for big business? What do you think about that? Because you touched on that somewhat.
I would love to speak to that if I could. Smedley Butler, people ask me what historical figures I look up to. He is at or near the top of the list. I never served in the military. Smedley Butler was a multiple-time Medal of War winner as a Marine. I don't know how far he reached, but he was a bona fide national hero. And what happened was the National Oil, I believe it was, U.S. Oil, the Getty family, Rockefeller, others, they tried to co-opt this guy, General Smedley Butler, into participating in an overthrow of the FDR regime. He didn't do that. He told the truth. He testified all that he had been told by these people in front of an open congressional testimony. I think it's very telling that the media, when they reported on this, it was a tongue-in-cheek report, and but in fact, that actually happened. So when Eisenhower was leaving office and he warned us about the military-industrial complex, I think he was not kidding. And I think that this country is far more susceptible to these very dark and hidden influences than we might imagine.
Susan?
Yeah, so that picks up actually where I was heading, and it came back to me. So the Democrats and Republicans, the Christians inside of these two parties have been working together to create this industrial complex that we've got now and to get us into all these wars. And they've turned the United States into a missionary of Jesus. And we have to, like I said, get rid of the religious aspect of things that have been brought into our country. And because of the Christianity in these two parties, they've been working together to create laws and to keep out other parties. So, for instance, the people in charge of elections are the Secretary of State and the county clerk. And never, ever in any state of our union has there ever been anyone elected from the Green Party as a Secretary of State or as a Libertarian as a Secretary of State. And that also goes for county clerks. They've only always been, most likely, at this part I don't know, but I'm going to say they're probably Christian, and but at 100%, they've only been Democrat or Republican. And this is where the problem is. They've taken control of our country, the Democrats and Republicans, and they need to, we have this monopoly, and we got to get rid of them. So I'm working on a lawsuit right now that I'm going to be sending off very soon, and I hope to be ending this monopoly that we have and to create a new way of voting so that we can start there by getting the Republicans and the Democrats out of power and opening it up to the Green Party and the Libertarians and the Freedom Party and all the other parties out there, the socialists, everybody. But also by giving the vote to the people, that also brings in all of the parties. So then getting rid of the House of Representatives and having everybody vote will bring in all these other parties into the deciding of how our country goes. So I think this is a good first step of freeing our country from this stranglehold that the two big parties have. And yeah, it's a religious thing, and we have to stop it. And it also, we have to go back to to Palestine, and Israel can have the land that they own, but it's no longer Israel with Palestine inside. It's got to be vice versa, because we had friends in the Middle East before we and the UN voted on this back in 1947, or 1948. So it's time to go back. It's one thing we really can change. It's not too late. And it's time. I'm tired of war.
Let me ask you a question, not just you, Susan. This is for the whole panel. Each one of you, I've heard you speak about the corruption, graft within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But here's a hard question, and I want to answer from everybody on the panel. I want everybody to answer this question. I was fortunate enough to interview independent candidate Dr. Dr. Cornel West. And I asked him a question, and he never answered the question. At the time, he was a member of the People's Party, and information came out that there was misogyny, sexual predation, white supremacy, and other forms of corruption that had racked the entire People's Party. And I asked him, why didn't he denounce it publicly and expose it? And he never answered the question. He just dodged it and talked about how he left the party and went to another independent party, and that party was rife with certain things analogous to what the People's Party was rife with, and then he wound up quote unquote independent. So I'm saying that one could argue, and I'd like to hear from each of the panelists, what about these other parties, the corruption, if in fact it is, and how independent candidates don't even want to talk about the corruption within those third, fourth, and fifth parties? Each panelist, you can go first, Emmanuel.
I wanted to address it because it's immediately relevant. So I ran as candidate for president in the Green Party. Cornel West and I were the only two candidates who were up and running. We were registered, and we had websites, and we could collect money. And I didn't exist, right? So Cornel West refused to talk to me, refused to acknowledge my existence, and the party itself was set up essentially to make me disappear. So I'm very aware of that. Cornel West has refused to address numerous cases of corruption within the United States government and within the Green Party. So let me speak bluntly about the Green Party and how, and for that matter, Libertarian Party. And I can't document this for you right now, but I'd be happy to discuss, if you'd like at a later date, what the reasons for this position. Basically, there's a group of private intelligence firms. Booz Allen Hamilton and Cassie are the largest, but there's about 10 of them. They get Homeland Security budgets for anti-disinformation, which they use to pay off members of parties, Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, Green, and others to do their bidding. And their job is to make sure that there's no formation of an independent advocacy to propose policy which hasn't already been vetted by multinational corporations. That's basically what's going on. And so when I was in the Green Party, essentially the order went down from above that I was not allowed to raise any money, and I was blocked out of all media discussion. I didn't exist. So on Wikipedia, I was a candidate. So if you found it, but essentially the whole system is fixed. The level of corruption goes beyond what I think most Americans are willing to acknowledge. And it's very painful, even traumatic, to accept the fact that all these figures who appear on TV are essentially being paid kickbacks to toe the line on COVID, on Federal Reserve creation of money, on 9/11, on endless war. And they may throw in a little bit of multicultural fluffing and icing on the cake, but basically all of them toe the line on the essential issues. And I hope this discussion will at least have a chance to say we have some candidates out there who are willing to speak some real truth, not limited hangout, don't step on the toes of my rich donors truth.
Interesting. Next up.
I would maybe add that I don't want to pile on to Dr. West too hard, but he also took a ton of money from Texas billionaire Harlan Crow. Harlan Crow is an active opponent of student loan cancellation. So that I took that quite personally, and I can't speak for what his reasons were. Apparently there's a long-standing relationship going back there, but it all stinks. All political parties, whether it's the Green Party or the People Party or a party that you start tomorrow in your garage, any political party is just inherently susceptible to corruption. Anytime you have, that sort of power with, let's say, the ability to get a name on a ballot, that takes money. And I think that's, again, one of the greatest dangers. And the reason I'm running as an independent, I have never even considered approaching any other parties, is I don't think they're needed. I don't think they're helpful. I am begging people out there, think about what I said tonight and bring your pen to the poll. I tell everyone, be ready to write in a candidate rather than bow down to the established political party process that's been cast down upon us. We've got to break this machine, and it might not be easy or fun or pleasant, but it's really got to happen. And only when people out there realize that this indeed is their fight, and you might have to get your knuckles a little muddy and a little bloody, but if that's what it takes to actually protect actual democracy in this country, well, that's what it is.
Susan?
Well, about West, I think maybe he had connections that he doesn't want to sever yet, so he just walked away rather than making it public. But my understanding is, and I think he's still in the race, right? But he's running just in the primary right now, I believe. And
Correct.
I've heard that you can get matching funds from a government fund when you're in the primary for donations that you've been given. So he might just be in it for the money. People donate to him and then he can get those funds matched and then they're his, right? So I don't know. I don't really know him very well. He seemed very extroverted to me. And I'm really not into extroverted people. So, all this razzmatazz and loud stuff, it's just not me. I don't know. But I know he was running with the Green Party, and then suddenly he wasn't, and I didn't quite get what was going on. And then there's been things being said that he should have said something or done something, and so maybe he doesn't really care. Maybe he was just in it for the money, and maybe they weren't giving him enough money, and so he left. Maybe that's the real truth. I don't know. We can make all of our own thoughts about it, but that perhaps is really the sad truth. So for me, when I discovered the corruption in our government, I immediately stopped, or in our election cycle and system, I immediately stopped running for office, and I started suing my Secretary of State and the election division, because this, we have people who have given their lives for our country, and they're not here to defend themselves. Nobody has to. These people are illegal in office. We have to stop them. So I'm here to be their voice and to stop this corruption. We have to, for our sake, for our children's sake, for our future children's sake. We have to stop it. So I don't know what he did, but all I can tell you is what I do. And I'm working on it. Sorry, I do that sometimes when I get really, when it gets deep inside of me, the hurt and the anger. Sorry.
It's cool. It's cool. A question just occurred to me. Is money inherently bad, or is the people who offer the money inherently bad? Because I would think that money is neutral.
It's capitalism. It brings out the worst in everybody. It brings out jealousy and competition.
So
and that's not good. We need to better ourselves. We need to focus on bettering ourselves, not what our neighbor is doing.
Let me ask you. So if a person is a good person, you're saying, what I hear you saying is that if they had money or if they offer money, they magically become a bad person?
No. What happens is people look around at other people and they see that they're having more success, and then they get jealous. And that's where the problem lies. And then we have maybe extroverts who flash it around and say, hey, look at me, I'm having so much success. And then people get jealous. And so it doesn't have to be. And that's part of one of my platform pieces, is because if we start paying mothers and we start giving dads a day off, we relieve a lot of stress, because stress creates envy and it creates jealousy. And why are you having so much success and why am I not? And so it's that. But then also when your two people are doing something like, let's say, trying to run a restaurant, and one restaurant is more popular than the other, then somebody will have more money. And it's actually okay to just have money and live your life. But so many people are focused in our capitalist way of looking around and seeing everybody as competition. So as soon as we start seeing each other as friends and family, and we're in it together, the better things will be. So I suggest, I call it friendly capitalism, where we still have a lot of freedom and free trade and different products, but instead let's focus on doing our products better rather than cheaper, and creating value for people rather than cheap.
Alan?
And
Yeah, I was
that's,
just. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Susan.
no, it's okay. Somebody
Okay,
else can go.
So you,
I just
what,
wanted to point out. Sorry.
well, you finished your thought, Susan?
Yeah, I'm done. I think I said enough.
Alan?
Yeah, thank you. So this is a little bit of a hopeful piece of information for everyone, and hopefully you already noticed. You know, in 2016, Donald Trump won that election. He did not raise or spend very much. I mean, tens of millions is a lot of money, but compared to what the Democrats raised and spent, he spent very little. In fact, his whole entire organization was pretty laughable. He only had, offices open in maybe the largest cities in the country. But he did not have any sort of the political machine that we typically see in a typical election. So it's not a foregone conclusion that money will win elections. I think a good candidate with the right policy can win elections. It takes some money. Like there's a certain floor. Like ideally, I like my own campaign. I would think in order to maybe get on the ballots in most states without having to align with one party or the other, that can get expensive. That's in the millions of dollars. So Ross Perot spent about 18 million to get on most state ballots in 1984, was it? So there's some money that is needed. The money is neither good or bad. It's just a fact that you need at least enough to get on the ballots in states. That would be helpful. But even there are write-in there, people can win elections as a write-in candidate. So I would just urge everybody out there watching this, don't be cynical from the get-go that you have no chance in politics. If you feel strongly about something, if you have a strong argument, as I do, don't be afraid to run. If you've got good ideas, you might be surprised how far you can take them.
Let me try to sharpen the question. If Jane Q. Public donates $1,000 to whatever candidate she likes, and John Q. Public donates $100,000, or let's just say $100 million, why is the John Q. Public looked upon as being corrupt and Jane Q. Public is not?
Because the election commission has limits. So the woman, what did you call her, JQ Public? She stayed within the limit, and the other guy is way over the limit. You can, I guess, keep it, of course, but it's actually against the election process. It's illegal, technically.
Well, let's tweak that. Within the confines of campaign finance, John Q. Public stays within the confines of that, as opposed to donating some money that he was not allowed to donate, but he stayed in the confines. The point I'm trying to make is that, because I asked the question specifically, is money in and of itself corruption, or the people who are donating is corrupt, and is it only wealthy people that are corrupt? I'm saying if a person is a good person and they donate money, whether it's $1 or $100,000, shouldn't it still be good? Should it have to be the person who's donated a substantial amount of money is corrupt, and the person who donated a small amount? Emmanuel, because you've been trying to get in.
Yeah, well, I think there's enormous amount of corruption, and it's linked to the emergence of a class society, right? Where you have a privileged society who have a certain amount of money, who are able to do whatever they want. The big problem with parties now is that if you or I give $1,000 donation to a party, right? It's an abstraction, right? We're hoping they're going to fulfill our dreams for what the United States could be, or what a fair society could be. If a corporation or a billionaire gives millions of dollars directly or indirectly to a party, it's not an aspiration or a dream, right? They are being rewarded directly for what they give. They get access and they get their privileges and they get their laws passed for them. So they give that money because they get something for it. You give the money, you don't get anything for it except for this vague idea that something good might happen at some future date. So one of the real changes that has to take place is that you, as a citizen participating in the political process, you should be rewarded too. And this is one of the reasons why so many citizens are not interested in voting or in the political process, because there's nothing in it for them, right? You give, so if someone gives $100,000 and you give $5, you don't get $5 worth of influence, right? You get zero influence, right? If you don't give couple $100,000, you're really not going to have any influence at all, any significant influence. So that has to change. And it's linked to the issue of money. So the question of whether evil resides with the individual or with systems, whether money is evil or is not, this is a long debate, been going on for the last 3,000 years. We're not going to answer it today. But what I think we can say is that money today is created artificially through the Federal Reserve. Much of the money that these billionaires say they have, they don't have, right? They create it through derivatives and stock, which they buy back using money from the federal government, which they print up. And so they're able to essentially corral and destroy our economies through a fraudulent manner. I think the only answer to this is a confrontational and in a sense, revolutionary approach, right? That we have to go and say, you guys, all of you are criminals. You've been taking the money, and I'm not afraid to do that. It may not be with the other candidates are there, but I'm happy to go and approach the Democratic and Republican Party and say to them, you guys collaborated on 9/11. You collaborated on Federal Reserve fraud. You collaborated on COVID-19 regime. You guys should all step down. You all are criminals. You have no right to run for office. Let's clean house. Now, this may be a little bit further than other candidates are willing to go, but I think I would be dishonest if I didn't express this opinion. Thank you.
All right, before I get you in here, Alan, let me try to pin Emmanuel down. I'm listening to you, but it appears that you're saying, or you haven't said, and I want to hear you say it, that the amount of money determines whether or not the person is corrupt. Because if the person gives a small amount of money, they're not quote unquote hopeful. I mean, they're hopeful that the right thing will happen. Whereas John Q. Public gives 100,000 and he's not hopeful like Jane Q. Public is. He has, you haven't said it, but what is the determining factor of the corruption? Is it the amount of money? Or, I mean, you know, it doesn't.
Well, to some degree, it is the amount of money. So there's a class of people, and I don't want to say where the cutoff point is. There's a class of people where you're giving money and it's a good feeling and you're hoping that the party or the politician is going to do what you want. And then there's a class of people who give a larger amount of money where it's quid pro quo. They're giving 100,000 or 1 million or 10 million or 100 million, and they're going to get these things. So people operating at that level, their interaction with the politician is not, I mean, you can't call your politician. I mean, as you know, Democratic Party, you can't talk to somebody. You can't meet your local representative. You can't make a deal with them. You can't say, I'm going to give you $10 or $100. I want you to do this for me, or I want to be able to talk to your politician. There's no negotiation. It's a one-way deal. I
don't know.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. There are a lot of politicians in federal penitentiary just for taking pittance.
Oh, well, so, well, okay. So I may be wrong, but I guess let me say the other part and then I'll stop. And that is to say, at the highest level, if you're giving millions of dollars to your corporation, the way it works is you have a representative of your law firm or your lobbying firm or your PR firm. They go to the office of the congressman and they make a deal. And they say, we're going to give you this much. We're going to get this. and it's totally obvious. So it's quid pro quo, but we, the average citizen, there's no quid pro quo.
Okay, I hear you, but I've seen just right here in Philadelphia too many. They call them scandals, but I call them corruption exposés, where
Right.
individuals involved just took nickels and they wound up going to the federal penitentiary for taking nickels.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, we see this all the time, going after people who are not guilty. I mean, this is how the whole, the justice system works, right? You have these massive criminals who do horribly illegal things and cost the country trillions of dollars and get thousands of people killed in foreign wars, and nothing happens to them. And you are there, and the police run some sort of entrapment scheme to get you in the system, setting you up, and you're going to go to jail for corruption. Wasn't even corruption. Happens all the time. That's called a class society.
I wasn't really talking about that. I was talking specifically about individuals, not just in Philadelphia. I just use Philadelphia as an example, but a country where people actually break the rules, but they break the rules and only take nickels. They break the rule by taking nickels, $20 ticket to a sporting event or whatever, and only it's like $30, $40, but that's illegal. That's graft. That's the federal term they use is I forget the exact number in the federal statute, but it's called corruption of moral service of moral services. Because as a public official, you're duty bound to give moral service, and if you take money in exchange, no matter how much, if it's a $30, $40 ticket to a sporting events, that's in fact breaking the law. Not just political rules, but it's actually breaking the law. So the point was, if it's only $100, but it's still breaking the law, I'm trying to figure out why is it there's so much focus on those who give obscene amounts of money or substantial money, as opposed to people who give small amounts of money, and both of them, if the individual takes it predicated on quid pro quo, is still illegal. But the focus seems to just be on those who give away money. But go ahead, Alan, because you've been waiting to get in for a minute.
Oh, my only point was that, it really depends on the candidate. And if people are worried about corruption, I strongly suggest they vet their candidates. And it's probably a pretty good bet to vote for a non-party aligned candidate who isn't playing that fundraising game like the other people do. You can never really tell the true heart of a man or a woman. Of course, that's true. But in general, I think the poorer candidates are probably a better bet. It's been like my life's experience that people who aren't extremely wealthy probably aren't extremely wealthy because they're pretty honest people. And so, at the end of the day, this thing is adjudicated ideally, and I hope that's still true, at a fair ballot box where normal people cast normal votes and they're counted in a fair way. And so we need to really put that thing to a test. When I was a kid, just quick story, when I was a kid, the year I was born, the entire city council of the city of Tacoma, with the exception of my grandmother, was booted out of the city council. The corruption in Tacoma, Washington, 1970 was just absolutely legendary. And so I agree. I think we need to see something like that happen on a much grander scale. I would like to see both parties, the D's and the R's, trounced out of office by an engaged and enlightened and a passionate citizenry.
Well said. Well said. Well said. Interesting. Next up, I guess that wraps it up. So where do we hard pivot now? Yeah.
Um, no, I mean, I'm kind of monitoring the chat as well, and I'm not really seeing anything other than.
I just talked about myself being from Philadelphia and just being involved with the court system, being prosecuted as a child, and sent to prison to die, and fighting to become vindicated and secure my freedom. While I've secured my freedom, I still have yet to be exonerated, which I'm working on now. And fortunately, we have a district attorney who's open for that because he's exonerated to this point over 45 individuals, 9 of which were children, which means that the city of Philadelphia, state of Pennsylvania, puts in prison more children than anywhere else in the world, not just in America, but anywhere else in the world. And the 9 exonerations of children is a record for the Philadelphia jurisdiction. And America being the only country in the world that sentences children to die in prison, and Pennsylvania leading America, and then Philadelphia leading Pennsylvania, which means that Philadelphia is the #1 jurisdiction on the planet that sentences children to death by imprisonment, more so than anywhere else. All the other 193 nations of the world have abolished that draconian sentence, where America is the only country in the world that practices this method. And the fact that we now know that many of these children are actually innocent with the evidence to prove it, it makes it that much more treacherous, if you will.
No, it's just interesting to hear all of this discourse about corruption and, how these systems at play, how they actually operate. And I mean, that's more or less why I'm here and what I wanted to listen in on. So. Do I have any questions for the panelists in particular? Not really. I mean, it was very interesting. I don't have any specific questions. Other than it's great to hear, people outside of the traditional parties, fight for this position and this role. And, I sincerely hope that.
Sure, I think I understood the question. What I brought to this table, what I bring to this table, is an issue, student loans, for which 40 million voters in the country are tonight losing sleep over their loans. 40 million people will never be able to repay their loans. So I'm speaking to the interests of all of those people. I've got about 1.5 million or so people in my various platforms, my petition, my Facebook groups, etc. But I find there's a lot of commonality among, although our members span the political spectrum. I think the major points that I've mentioned tonight about wealth disparity, taxing the rich, corruption, these are things very deeply and strongly held by the majority of people in the country. So, and what I've heard from Emmanuel and Susan, I think we're completely on the same page, certainly on those issues. And so, wherever you may be, anything that I can help with my networks bring to bear on your campaigns, and anything that we can maybe jointly do to get some more media coverage. Right now, for me, media, I think it's what brought me into this game. I think it's what is going to win this game. And I actually believe that I can win. I believe that on November 5th, I think I can actually win this election if I can get a significant percentage of student loan borrowers on my side. But getting some real mainstream media coverage, unfortunately, is kind of a thing that has to happen. And so anything that I can do to help this panel, get a larger soapbox to speak from, I'm very happy to contribute.
Did you want me to answer that, or? Okay. Well, yeah, I think he talks a good talk. He's also a little bit an extrovert, and I think
Understatement.
he has some good ideas, and he's figured some things out himself, but I don't know if he always goes the full distance, and I don't know why. Well, so what I need, what we really need to do, since we've all known about the corruption that's in the system, is I've discovered you can report it to the FBI, and you can sue your state and your government and all of this. It's the First Amendment. We have a right to petition our government with grievances. So I need to get a document off to the Supreme Court, and so that we can end this thing called registering to vote and start voting constitutionally. So I don't know, Emmanuel, I believe you've had experience voting in another country, right? Are you not in Korea?
I'm in Japan now, but I have
Oh.
voted from abroad. Yes.
But so you're only a U.S. citizen, or do you have dual citizenship?
I have dual citizenship with Korea and the United States.
Okay,
but I've never voted. I've never voted in Korea.
Oh, so okay. But do you know how they vote?
How Koreans vote?
Yeah.
I'm not a technical expert on the Korean voting system. No, but my understanding is it's more transparent than the United States. And of course, you're not allowed to advertise in the way in the United States, and but there's plenty of corruption in Korea as well. I'm not.
It's hard
to sell Korea.
How being in a political office that's high, there will be some corruption because given enough power, people tend to get corrupt. It's not 100% a guarantee, but it does happen. DJ Elf 7, have you voted in Korea?
A response to which to uh, oh, okay. But briefly, 요즘에는 그 김정은의 그런 통일에 대한 발언에 대해서는 우리 확실한 정보 없으니까 저는 이 단계에서는 아무 말 못해요. 다만은 요즘은 북한은 어떤 의미에서 국제 금융에 그 영향이 많아서 독립적인 발언이나 활동이 못하는 것 같아요. 네. So I just want to say that I'm sorry to bring up this issue of Korea, but I think it's important just to say that Korea, China, Japan are very important in the United States, and we have such ignorance on these topics. And that was one of the things I emphasized in my own approach. On the question of North Korea, increasingly, North Korea is doing things which seem to be aligned with what the Pentagon wants, to increase military budget. And so I'm very, very skeptical about everything that you hear out of North Korea. There are many people who speculate that North Koreans are just paid off to help support missile defense and the U.S. buildup in East Asia. And I think there's evidence, circumstantial evidence, to support that position. So North Korea is plenty dangerous, but not dangerous as an ideological challenge, but rather as part of this system of militarization. Right. Well, so on the case of Alan's on student loans, obviously I would be happy to make that central in the campaign going forward. And obviously in the final, if Alan can get further, I'd be happy to support Alan in his campaign. I feel student loan is part of the issue of finance and this effort essentially to create a form of slavery in the United States. It's not just student loans, it's health, and medical insurance scam is like that. And actually foreign wars are part of this scam. So I would be fully supportive of that. I don't see any, for Susan, on the issue of women and the support for women and for families, that women play the most important role in our society. Families obviously are the basis for governance.
Hi. Yeah, no, I just, given this new format of, the way that we're able to have these debates over these independent formats via, these Google chats and YouTube and online, is there the possibility for these kind of independent parties to come up and actually have a standing chance in these elections? Do we think that this is a new format that, can actually have power and stand a running chance?
I would say absolutely yes. I would, as I said about an hour ago, only 1.5% of the population actually donate to the Republicans or the Democrats. And I think people aren't stupid. People see that both parties have essentially got this nation in a stranglehold.
Especially today.
Yeah. And I'm hopeful, when something is this unstable It only takes a very small perturbation, the right flick in the right place to bring the whole house of cards down. And so I think it would be criminal not to try to keep tapping on the uniparty skeleton and finding those cracks. I think they're everywhere. My own personal campaign, I actually think that I can get the student loan problem solved. I can get one or both parties to actually solve this problem before the election as the result of my campaign. So for me, it's a win-win. I still believe I can actually win, as whatever you may think. But even the plan B is a very good plan from my perspective. I just hope everybody out there with student loans will come to collegeforpresident.com and let's get this show going.
Can I chime in and answer that question about using 21st century technology to break up the two-party system? And the answer is, unfortunately, no. As long as we have single winner districts, we will always tend toward a two-party system. That is just the way the math works. Alan kind of touched on it a moment ago when he said that he could get one of the two big parties to solve his problem for him. And this is what happens, is as soon as a third party starts to get traction, one of the two big parties absorbs it, the same way that, big companies buy out their competitors. And then we're back to a two-party system. It's market efficiency. It's called Duverger's law. So we're stuck with a two-party system. That being said, the way that we can move our democracy forward in the 21st century using the technology like this is to unionize as voters, to crowdsource the legislative process ourselves, away from the swamp of Washington and all the lobbyists with their dirty fingers. We can write good, clean legislation ourselves. And by coming together as a national bloc of swing voters, demand legislative package, again, like Alan said, before the election, in exchange for our votes, passage of certain reforms. And so in 2024, the American Union is offering the Trump-Biden peace plan, a legislative package to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, connecting the dots between Dr. King's triple evils that he identified. And if you'd like to read more about how this can work, publishing my first novel, a fictionalized version of this, looking backward from the tricentennial, imagining, demonstrating, showing how 21st century collaborative democracy can work and bring America together around our constitutional duties and get us out of this rut that the two parties have driven us into. So that's the answer to the question. There's a better way forward, but we're stuck with two parties. Well, that's how a union works, is everybody comes together with their own issues and interests and their own areas of expertise. And then you collectively bargain together because we're stronger together. And the ability to to cut through the gridlock of Washington, D.C. and actually solve problems for the American people, right? Yes. Yeah, this is.
Well, I think exchanging ideas, having roundtables, and coming up with real solutions. I think we can already start bringing change now. We don't have to wait for the election. And I think that will help the American people to vote for us easier if we're already doing something. A lot of the big ones like Trump and stuff, he's selling sneakers. Is that helping anybody but him? And Kennedy, he's offering a win to go sailing with him. Is that helping anybody? So I don't know what these guys are thinking, but I'm talking about a lawsuit to stop this fraudulent election that's going on and starting over from scratch with a new system. So I'm actually bringing change before I'm even president. And this is where I think we need to begin. I already also contacted the FBI about it. I mean, I have been working for 2 years on this, more than 2 years. And part of the problem is my own lawyer ability is not very high, but I don't have the money to really hire lawyers. So I'm doing the best I can, but that's what I can do. And I think, if we want to bring change, we need to start now. So write up that document that you want about the student loan issues. Write it up and let's maybe show it to us, and we can all go over it and decide if that's going to work. For me, for student loans, I'm sorry, I had student loans. I did pay them off eventually. It took me 10 years. But what happened is I agreed to take out those loans and I agreed to pay them back. And if that's the case, then that's the case. If you really think that you were deceived in some way, then you need to sue your school, because they obviously didn't give you a degree that was usable. Otherwise, you'd be making enough money to pay your student loans back.
Yeah, unfortunately, student loans are constituted unconstitutionally. So the founding fathers called for uniform bankruptcy laws in the Constitution. The right of bankruptcy has been uniquely stripped from student loans.
I know. I declared bankruptcy to get rid of my debt, and I couldn't get rid of my student loan debt, so I eventually had to pay it off myself.
Well, that's precisely what the founding fathers didn't want. It's very important that we have uniform bankruptcy laws in this country. And, for the first 15 years of my fight in this battle, I fought very moderately that student loans should be treated the same as all other debt in bankruptcy court. Well, now here today, Congress failed, and now we have a lending program that has catastrophically failed. So you paid in years or decades past. I don't know. I applaud you. I salute you. But the fact of the matter is that today, 80% of all borrowers are unable to even make payments on their student loans. The lending system is finished. The lending system has failed. The loans will be canceled. They will not be paid. The only question is whether we destroy the financial livelihoods and lives of the 40 million people affected till the end of their lives when the loans are ultimately discharged, or whether we get rid of this unconstitutional debt in a very clean, efficient way that stimulates the economy today and doesn't penalize generation after generation of normal, low-income people from going to college. Well,
so my solution for that is that I think we have a lot of people who didn't, how can I explain it? We need like a finishing school to bring people to a certain level of knowledge, because we've got a whole bunch of people who have different skills, but they're not pulling them together and making a career out of it. So we need like a finishing school to develop people to that level, but then they also have to give back to their community using the new skills.
Yeah, that's a little bit. Yeah, that's just a little bit out of what I see as practical and what is possible. What is possible today with student loans is number one, returning bankruptcy to the loans, but beyond returning this constitutional right, it's going to become overwhelmingly clear that vast tranches of the loans have got to be canceled. So anything, beyond that in terms of free college going forward, I think that's a great idea. I'm including it in my campaign to some extent. But what a president can do actually is those two things I just mentioned. He can cancel the loans by executive order. He can, and with Congress, he can return standard bankruptcy rights.
If we cancel the loans as is, then we're rewarding the banks and we're rewarding the schools that charged an excess amount of money for an education that they didn't give. So we're continuing the cycle. So if anything, we need to sue the schools who gave the kids a bad education.
I actually agree with you I agree with you completely. And in fact, as a part of my plan, the loans will be canceled. Make no mistake. And that's not me saying that. That is an actual fact. The loans will not be paid. The colleges need to be clawed some money back from. I didn't say that correctly, but number one, bankruptcy legislation that I'm fighting for has a clawback that puts the colleges, makes them financially liable for a significant portion of the debt in the event of a discharge. In the event of full-on loan cancellation, first of all, most of that money that's canceled, it's fake money, it's fiat. It was created out of thin air, it's interest, it's monopoly money. The government, the taxpayers are not paying for that. In fact, the taxpayers will be breaking about even. The profit that the government has made on this loan scam over the past 30 years is in the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. But if there is a shortfall to the taxpayer, absolutely, the colleges should be put on the hook for that. And that is definitely a part of my plan. I couldn't agree with you more.
So write up a lawsuit.
The law is not on our side. The bad guys have bought the law. The bad guys don't need to break the law.
That's not an excuse. I'm fighting the Democrats, the Republicans, the government. I'm not giving up. So stop giving up.
Well, you're not going to sue your way out of this because we have a captured Supreme Court that probably wouldn't even return bankruptcy rights to the loans. They certainly won't cancel the loans. This is not something you can sue your way out of unless you have a lot of money. And we're not, distressed student loan borrowers can't coalesce and come up with enough money to pay for a high-priced Washington, D.C. law firm, et cetera, et cetera. It's not going to happen. The only solution I see to this is political. And the only office that can affect this is the presidency. So that's why I'm here.
Well, we have to put the blame where it belongs, and that's on the schools giving bad educations.
Well, it's on the.
So I don't agree with that statement. Please. Mm-hmm.
This is in the YouTube? In the YouTube? Oh, I don't. Okay. What is your opinion with the parties within parties and the Democrats and conservatives on Republicans? That's what I see. What is going on with their candidates? What is your opinion of parties within parties and the Democrats and conservatives on the Republicans? That's what I see.
Right. Well, could I just say something briefly on this? So basically, political parties, Democratic Party and Republican parties, are not political parties at all anymore. They're a combination of public relations firms, representatives of investment banks, and a variety of operatives. Many of the people who work in Democratic Party, they work for it for 2 years, and then they go work for a hedge fund company for 6 months to be paid off, and they go back. So they're not even really, there's no local communities involved. There are no citizens involved. It's basically a public relations firm. So most of these debates, say within the Republican Party with the Trumpists and the non-Trumpists, is, I'd say 85% it's a show. There is some difference in that the supporters at the grassroots, the people who go for this show, is slightly different for the Trump people and for mainstream Republicans. So the Trump people bring in a little bit more of average working people who buy into it, and the mainstream Republicans will bring in more of the people who want to avoid paying taxes and get special deals in local government by paying people off. The Democratic Party, just a promotion of a brain dead Biden, is I think an effort to accustom the citizens to accepting an unaccountable government. So there is no Democratic Party, and we're supposed to buy into this idea, to buy into a lie that Biden is president, and that's a psychological strategy for breaking down people's resistance so they're unable to form their own independent opinions. You're forced to accept this lie that Biden is president, even though he's not. And if you continue to accept this lie over time, eventually it will degrade your ability to make judgments. So the political parties are not really political parties at all. And I feel very strongly, I guess I would go further than the other two candidates in saying that the Declaration of Independence, which asserts very clearly that the American tradition is democratic, Republican, but it's also revolutionary by nature. And the Declaration of Independence, which defines our country, says, when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, the citizens, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for the future security, which is to say that if they go over the line, that the process of using the legal system or the voting system is no longer a viable solution. And we have to form at the local level revolutionary groups who will say that we follow the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and that this so-called federal government is a criminal syndicate, and we do not recognize it. And in fact, going further than that, I have no intention of recognizing this election to start with. We have to have a special election which is transparent, in which there are no lobbying firms, and the Democratic Republican Party operatives, which are basically run by Israeli and other foreign governments, will play no role. So I take a little bit more confrontational position.
Alan, you're muted.
Alan, we can't hear you.
Okay, I was just going to say I certainly can attest to that those conditions that you just laid out have been met with the federal student loan program. I'm not quite willing to go all the way and say the whole thing is rotten at this point, but certainly it's time for everybody and their brother who are concerned with this country and our democracy and our Constitution and all the ideals evinced in the Declaration of Independence. It is time to start whispering in your neighbor's ear and thinking, what should we be doing here? I think that's where we're at. So I agree.
I think that's a little bit what January 6th was about, right? Trump was still president at the time, and he was defending the Constitution. And although he's somewhat labeled a Republican, and maybe he's taken on more Republicanness lately, he's also an outsider. And so, on some things, I agree with what he's done during his presidency, and I don't know. Apparently, he was commander-in-chief also of the militia at the time. So January 6th was perhaps a little bit him trying to, prevent this illegal coup that took over, or that has been going on for the last 120 years. The group of Democrats and Republicans who are controlling our country. So I think, with the more lawsuits we can put out there and stop the two parties from controlling our country, the sooner we can move forward as a united country again and start building from the ashes, for the lack of a better way of putting it. But nothing's going to happen unless we either do it through justice or we do it through fighting. And for me, I would prefer to do it through justice and common sense. So that's my approach. But I believe Trump's approach was more, perhaps, I don't know if he gave the go-ahead to attack, but I think he certainly encouraged the actions of January 6th. And was he in the right or wrong? I have to admit, I think he was sort of in the right because he was defending the Constitution. And the election was clearly unconstitutional,
Well, just so
because
you know,
there was that registering to vote was in place, and your vote could not be counted unless you registered to vote, and that's where the fraud is, and that's where the manipulation is.
I just wanted to shout you out because you're a winner right now. I'm looking at the chat right here, and I see that Christine Kalia, her boyfriend, actually says he's voting for you. He liked your passion, and he said that you got her vote. So other guys, right? Yeah,
Wonderful.
You guys are doing a
Thank
great job.
you.
Honestly, the whole student loan thing is very, very appealing to me. Extremely appealing to me, Alan. Okay, I think man is killing it as in terms of like the foreign affairs stuff. I appreciate all of you, but Susan is our first winner of the night. Great job. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but just thought you would want to celebrate. Why wait to celebrate, right? Okay. All right. So Emmanuel, was there a line here? Emmanuel,
I want to make
go ahead.
I want to make a statement on January 6th because I disagree fundamentally. So the election was a total fraud, but Donald Trump was, although he got fewer votes in the corporate system, he was just as fraudulent as Biden was. Republican states were just as locked down, engaged in just as much voter fraud as Democrats did, and
you're right.
Absolutely. And so, and January 6th is a combination of a real movement of people with a psyop. It was a combination of the two. It was mixed together. Some parts of it were real anger by some citizens for good reasons, but some of it was set up by crisis actors. And it was this is sort of like in Las Vegas shooting or Sandy Hook, right? Where you confuse the population by having, in the same scenario, some parts where it's a psyop and some places where they're actually shooting people dead in order to confuse the population as to what really happened. And January 6th was like that. But I wrote in defense of Donald Trump, as you may know from Global Research, in which I said that his second impeachment was totally illegal. But it was not necessarily a defense that I thought Donald Trump was good. I just think he's probably less criminal than the other presidents.
Well, and you can't change anything from below. So he had to get in somehow, I think. And yes, I think he has good intentions. Whether all of them are for the best of the country, I don't know. A lot of it is personal opinion at this point. But, we probably haven't had a legal election for 120 years. At first I was thinking it only goes back to Jimmy Carter. I was thinking Jimmy Carter might be our last legal president. But as I looked further into the history, I realized, no, it's going way back to when the Zionists really started taking over and trying to control countries. They're heavily influencing Switzerland and also the USA. And that's why the UN is in both countries too. So the UN is working also as a Christian missionary service, and we need to break away from them as well, and move in our own direction.
Okay.
So
I think Ellen also.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish the point on Trump. Donald Trump tapped into a very real groundswell of disillusionment, alienation, and disappointment of normal people from both parties, quite frankly. And so I give him a lot of credit for that. But, Donald Trump ran as a Republican, and he governed as a Republican. Did Donald Trump build the wall? No. He built 47 miles of wall. Donald Trump essentially threw us under the bus with China. He softened his stance on Taiwan while his family was granted very lucrative trademarks in the country of China, right in the same time period. So, and I watch War Room, for example, every day. I keep my finger on the pulse of MAGA Nation on a daily basis. And I can tell you that Steve Bannon and all the people behind Trump are hardcore Republicans. They are swamp. They are Washington, D.C. They want to keep taxes low. They want to keep the people fighting against each other so that we don't turn our attention to breaking the elitist wealth hegemony, or whatever you want to call it, that has gripped this nation and now has us in a death grip. So Trump is not a populist in my view. He's just kind of a shameless politician like many others. But I give him a lot of credit for originality.
Well, and I guess that's why we're all running for president, right?
Right.
Because Trump is also not the solution.
Okay, interesting. All right, so thanks. You guys did a great job pitching. Anybody else? Just so you know, I think I did not mention earlier. This is the free. I probably should have. The town hall questions. You have about 20 minutes left. Not really right yet to ask questions from the audience if you want. There was a question already. Please feel free to ask questions now. This is really the time for y'all. Okay. If not, I could come up with another one, but I want to give them the chance. Anybody else have a question here?
Well, I wanted to make a short statement, which is to say to everyone watching that we will welcome your participation. That you can call me up or email me. I'll work with you directly, and that most of this distancing of politicians from ordinary people is not because they're so busy, right? But there's an intentional inaccessibility which has been created in our society.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, this division is really sad that we're allowing this to happen, but it's marketing. We get a lot of marketing and crap, so I get it. That the advertising, public relations agencies, like you said. All right. So the thing is, what do we? You guys have anything? Any plans? Anything's coming up? You guys have any projects coming up?
Well, I'm working on this border issue, and so I'm going to be, I don't know, releasing something probably over the next week about my discoveries here in Texas and New Mexico and Arizona in regards to Mexico and the border. And I have to admit, I think I've changed my mind completely from what I was saying before. So it's important. And as we grow and learn and investigate as people and as eventually a president, perhaps, we have to realize that sometimes we will think one thing going in, but then realize as we discover information, change our mind and have to stand up and say, hey, no, I changed my mind. So it's interesting. It's interesting.
I'm really looking forward to that. You might, I think, also be coming into New York, possibly for I know some people in public housing are not at the SECA meeting, but you may be coming into New York for an event for public housing. I don't know if you're going to get here, but
yeah,
what do you think?
That's coming up, right? When is that?
Maybe
that's next weekend?
Yeah, maybe next weekend. We're planning to stop by New York.
Next weekend might be difficult. Is it possible to push it back a week?
Yeah, sure. Whenever you want. Yeah, we appreciate you. Whenever you could get here. A presidential candidate always is always something that could bring some media attention, right? Yeah, I know you're on Good Morning America, and that's pretty good. Yeah. So for public housing, they need your help right now. They're about to be displaced. Yeah. That's
yeah.
cool.
Well, we got to find. What I've discovered is I've got an RV and I'm traveling around the country, and there's so many empty homes, so many little properties for sale. The thing is that New York is not the only place, and when I used to live there was a lot of slum places, that nobody really wanted to live in.
So really, Susan for USA.com. That's how people can contact you. They can look you up. They can actually send you information. And if you're on the way between, where are you right now? Texas?
I'm in Texas, yeah.
Texas and New York, maybe someone will ask you to stop by and do a little campaign thing on the way, yeah? Who knows? That would be cool.
Yeah, well, so my plan, too, is to, at some of these rest stops, I'll be starting to stop and put out a little table and ask people to come and ask me questions or whatever. I'm also going to go to public libraries and maybe do some children's book reading and also do town halls there. But yes, I have yet to really finalized setting up any of these things, but these things are coming. And then I want online town halls too, something like this. So yeah.
You're gonna update those things on Twitter or on your webpage or
on Facebook and my website and eventually Twitter. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. What about Emmanuel? What you got planned coming up? Anything cool?
Well, I hope we can do more of these events going forward. I've continued to have a series of speeches or talks on various critical issues. I'm going to talk about taxes, for example. Immigration is one, obviously, that I want to talk about and to describe things as they are. But I think that for me, the most critical part is this basic questioning of all the assumptions that we work with. That the assumptions about who owns things are flawed. The assumptions of who has authority in government are flawed. And to take the radical, it's actually totally logical, but it's radical in the current world in Washington, D.C., which is to say, if you have politicians and government officials who participated in felony crimes, then the first thing we need is not to throw them out of, re-elect someone else, is to have them resign immediately. Okay, so, and all of them are guilty.
So you got like an event coming up, or you got something that, we're going to do more of these sessions, right? Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
This is a perfect format. I'd be happy to do more of these.
What about, Alan, what you got coming up in the future? Anything coming up?
Oh, I've got a lot of stuff happening. So every Sunday I do a live stream. I roll out another issue. So far I've rolled out student loans, obviously, taxing the wealthy, cutting spending. I talked about China. I talked about reparations. But I've been doing maybe one or two radio shows a week over the past month or two. I expect that will continue, but typically I don't know about these media appearances until a day or so before it happens, or maybe sometimes even the same day. As far as events go, I would love to do sort of a bus tour across the country. Particularly, I'm in Wisconsin now, so wintertime, not so much, but come spring, early summer. Of course, that can be very expensive, and so I'll have to do some fundraising to do that. But I would urge everybody out there, particularly everybody with student loans, to keep an eye on this campaign. I keep all my latest stuff on our website. That's collingeforpresident.com. And of course, anybody out there with student loans who knows the pain that I'm fighting against, anything that anybody out there can do to get me into forums like this, I'll do the mainstream media, of course, but quite frankly, I'm not super optimistic given what I have seen. I'm sure we'll make some pretty good dents in the mainstream media, but I will talk to anyone, anywhere, anytime. I love going on conservative talk shows, for example.
I got some lined up for you, actually. My man Randy Perham, actually, from Alaska. Actually, he has a radio talk show. I'll get you on there. So
I love it.
I'm gonna go to Kori. Actually, I'm sorry she was waiting. I just wanted to finish the whole round. Your session. Go ahead, Kori. What you got?
Hi, Alan. Yeah, I was just curious what your argument is for, I guess, these students accruing these student loans. And I mean, what are they able to do with this in the working world? And how are they able to apply, especially undergrad loans? How is this actually helping them get careers? It just seems like having an undergrad degree isn't, especially in today's world, and students are accruing mass amounts of debt as a result of these undergrad degrees, but how it's actually applying to the real world, it's just antiquated to have an undergrad degree almost today.
For years and decades, all the colleges, all that whole network has been saying, go to college, you'll earn $1 million more over your lifetime if you go to college.
Absolutely.
It's completely false. If you look at today's statistics, clearly that's not true, because even before the pandemic, 85% of all borrowers were never going to be able to repay their loans. Today, 80% of all borrowers are not making payments on their loans. It's not because it's not a protest. It's not a strike. It's these people are buried and they can't do it anymore. And so the value, I'm not saying there's no value to going to college. I think there's, it depends on the person, but certainly the price that has been tagged onto a college education is heads and shoulders above any realistic, rational price that we should be paying.
And that's why I'm pushing for apprenticeships with the age of 14, 15, 16. because not everybody needs to go to college, and you shouldn't get a how can I say this? It's important to learn how to work first, how to be responsible, and then after like 3 years of being in an apprenticeship, you have an idea if that job is really for you, or you're in there and then you see, no, I want to do this rather than that, and then you can go to higher education with a purpose, with a goal of a real job in mind that you've seen somebody do. Whereas currently we have all this book learning that's done, and then people like, oh, I want to be this, and they have no idea what they're talking about. So I went through that system. I know how it works, and it's really hard. And I had tons of student loans, and I eventually paid them off, but it's not easy. And it takes took me 10 years. So, the point is that we have to change the system from the bottom. And if we get the current youth into an apprenticeship program as soon as possible, within the next year, then we already start saving those children, but then we can deal with the other issues. And part of my thing is I think, the government could take over the debt and we could get rid of it, but we can't just do that just for the sake of doing it. We do need something in return, and that's my point. So for me, I think that if these people would then do public service, community service, use the skills that they learned in the community so that they also get to use the things that they learned, then everybody is rewarded, right? The burden is lifted.
I think there's a very basic misunderstanding going on here. I think that your assumption is that we should cancel the loans and that almost everybody will get off scot-free without having to pay their loans. The fact of the matter is that the people have paid. They have paid and they have paid and they have paid. I can introduce you to people who have paid $100,000 on a $25,000 loan, and they still owe, according to the government, $130,000. So we're not talking about people who haven't paid their loans. We're not talking about free money to people. PPP loans, that was free money. That was expensive to the taxpayer. People have repaid their student loans. The overwhelming majority of the $1.7 trillion outstanding today is interest. It's interest, penalties, fees, other things over and above the principal balance. And remember, this is for a lending program that when they created it in 1965, it was guaranteed to be free of interest by President Lyndon Johnson at the time. He said these loans will be free of interest. Well, today, $100 billion in interest accrues to the Department of Education every year. That's profit. So I agree with you. People should not get a free ride to college and, all that stuff. That's fine. But the fact of the matter is we're not talking about free money to people. We're talking about stopping a nationally threatening loan scam from ruining these people and making them financially destitute and beholden and subjugated to the government for the rest of their lives. That's what we've had for the past 30 years. It will not continue. It will not. It cannot, and it will not. And
exactly, I agree with you on that.
I will put a clean end to this thing. I will replace the lending system with something that is fair, rationally priced, and that works, and that doesn't make the colleges obscenely rich and give them all this level of control over our young people to where they're stringing out a 4-year degree to over 6 years, and they're turning these people into serfs. It's nonsense. It won't continue on my watch.
I think I read somewhere there's a cap on how long you have to pay a student loan back. I believe it's only 20 years.
No, there is no statute of limitations on federal student
I thought
loans.
I saw, you know what, I'm going to run out of power here soon. I've only got 5%. So I'm sorry, I'm probably going to disappear.
Well, unlike all other loans for which there are a statute of limitations and for which there are bankruptcy rights, these two things have been uniquely stripped from student loans, federal student loans. They've become lifelong bonds of indenture.
Right. Well, I think we also need to talk a little bit about capital and banks in this matter. On the one hand, in the case of, say, apprenticeship, this cannot be talked about without talking about access to capital. So at present, my brother, for example, tried to start a small business recently, and he had to borrow all the money from his friends because banks don't lend to small people, right? They only lend to multinationals and chains. And so this makes it impossible to start your own business. So it's great to be an apprentice, but then you start your own business, and the whole system is set up so you have to work. You have to get a job working for someone who has access to capital. And the same is true on education. So universities have been captured by wealthy individuals who are on the board of trustees, right? And they got rich by taking money from the Federal Reserve for stock buybacks. That's how they made, this is what happened on the protests about Palestine at Harvard, right? So you had these Harvard board is basically, the whole contest was about these Obama billionaires, right, who own a large chunk. The former president of Harvard, Faust, resigned from Harvard as president to join the board of directors of Goldman Sachs. That tells you something. I mean, they now refer to Harvard as a investment fund with a university attached on the side, right? That's the sort of the joke about it. So universities are being run by banks, essentially, not by professors, and certainly not by students or their concerns. And so it's part of this system, for example, creating an indentured class. And we have to address the nature of banks and the nature of money.
Interesting.
Great point.
Well, what we need to do is raise a good next generation of people, and then we have to help the people that are in trouble. And these are things that I am planning and working on and working towards. But one step at a time. First, we got to get rid of the corruption and get legal people and people with good ideas into positions of useful positions where they can bring real change. And then we have to get started, because this is just too much. And, I think there seems to be more and more people who are willing to step forward, like Alan and Emmanuel. And so, yeah, we have to bring the change. Whatever. I think we can do it. We can bring our country to a new place and help our people, of course, and give power to the people. So that's I think where we're all headed, and that's good.
All right.
I've only got 3% now, so are we going much longer? Do you want me to log in again on a different phone, or?
We're almost done, but anything else? Kori's really. Anything else, Kori?
Anything on
Hi,
my
Kori.
end? Not really. No, these are great points. And I'm really glad that all this stuff got raised.
All right, folks. So I guess maybe I'll, unless there's any last questions, I believe that American Union had a question in the chat right here about how you would address climate change.
For me, climate change, I think it's healing the hole in the ozone. Actually, that's what NASA says. And so I believe that that's what's happening, and it's not the worst thing. We are seemingly the most polluted country, so we need to really get our cars under control. And we've got a lot of trash everywhere. That's what I'm seeing driving around. So we need to get our trash under control. I heard somewhere recycling doesn't really happen in the U.S., that it's fake. But I believe it is actually working in other countries where they really do recycle. So we need to get those people to come in and teach our people how to really recycle. And let's get recycling going, because we can only fill so many landfills before there's no land left to fill. And so I think that's really more my plan for the planet. And we do need to keep an eye on the temperature of the planet. But like I said, it's healing the ozone hole, supposedly. Although I've seen some mixed information about that recently too, so I might be wrong. I'm also not 100% sure that that's accurate either anymore. But give me another maybe year to really research this hole in the ozone concept, and then I'll know
I
more.
got that. Okay. Anybody else want to take a stab at that? Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, I am fully on board with exploring developing alternative fuels to carbon. I think that's a great idea. And, I don't want to sell the country short either. Look at a picture of downtown Los Angeles or any big city in this country in the 1970s and compare that to any photo of any urban downtown city today. And you will see that through very simple vehicle emission standards, maybe some other environmental legislation that we passed, we can radically clean up our environment. And quite frankly, it's quite stunning what we've been able to do up to this point. We need more of that. We don't need to get into a debate over whether global warming is real or not. It's common sense. And so why wouldn't we explore nuclear, solar, wind, tidal power, other ways that we can very cleanly exist on this planet? It's a no-brainer to me.
Cool. Emmanuel?
Well, I think I probably have a slightly different opinion on this. On the first question, on the nuclear power is obvious, in my opinion, is not an alternative. It's extremely dangerous technology, and it's not alternative energy, and it's not neutral in any sense. It's in fact been promoted as a way for certain powers in the military system to essentially hold down and threaten countries. So countries like Korea or Japan or Germany or France are under threat, that their systems, often the security systems for nuclear power plants, are controlled by Israeli security systems who can cause them to blow up at will. Regarding climate change, it's an extremely serious issue that needs to be addressed in a scientific manner. Sadly, we now have an environment in which it's impossible to have a scientific discussion. And I had an enormous fight with this in Green Party. Having looked at this issue for 25 years, didn't buy the argument made by a large chunk of people that climate change is just a fraud made up by multinational corporations. However, it clearly was a more complex phenomenon than Greta and Al Gore were trying to give you. So I thought we needed to have a scientific discussion about what we agree on, what we don't agree on. I think there's plenty of reason to believe that the world is getting warmer and that it's quite dangerous. The problem has been that it's a long-term process over 500 years. It's not 5 years. It's not 3 years. And I see plenty of evidence that there are people with vested interests who are planting this climate change skepticism for their own interests. So Susan seemed to imply there that it's just a myth. And that we should just focus on pollution. I think that would be a mistake. However, it should always be subject to rigorous scientific. In the Green Party, I said I would be happy to debate with all the skeptics about climate change or those who were for radical change and have a discussion. And it was not possible. Not a single one of the climate change skeptics was willing to debate me one-on-one on the topic. Because I actually taught a class on this subject. I don't buy into this hyped up climate change agenda for the World Economic Forum, but I also think that if you're going to say it's not true after all this work that was done, that you've got to prove it scientifically. And this is the same issue we have with viruses. You've probably seen now people say, well, the vaccines didn't work, and so COVID-19 is not true, and by extension, viruses don't exist. But the people advocating that viruses don't exist don't go to the foundational research on virology and take it apart, which is the first step. There's no scientific approach. And then we have these radical cases with like Stephen Lanka, where people say, well, Stephen Lanka says viruses don't exist. He never said that. There's not a single document in which he makes such a statement.
Just so you know, Emmanuel's definitely working with us to have a discussion panel like this, actually with more candidates on the
I would
vaccine
love
and the vaccine mandates, right? Actually, we're
to
leading
love to
with
do that.
James Roguski. We're working with other ones, so we're going to be. I think that should be an interesting discussion topic itself. I think it's being hosted by James Roguski, though. We're actually, just so you know, anybody who's watching, if you're actually a candidate, we have other discussion panels coming up, and if you're an activist, we will help drive your issues and hold discussion panels on those issues. We're farming out the Unified Platform for 24 in this series, and really one thing that another thing that powers this series is people talk about elections and how they're controlled. Well, the body that controls them are the state and the county committees, and right now we're trying to push ourselves into those particular bodies to establish control over those. I think that Alan had a great deal of insight, of course, being a 20-year activist, he would know, right? Yeah. He said that the problem is that they're spending millions of dollars, but we've actually open sourced the data, which is what do they spend the money on? They buy the voter data. You know what I mean? They buy the voter data, they go door to door, they pay the consultants to do the petitioning needed to make the candidates run. Okay, they also pay off, not-for-profit organizations, things like that complex. But really, most of the electoral money to gain the actual control through the election cycle must come through those petitionings that they have to do. So we've open sourced this data to the public, and this could be a way to actually drive people to support your actual positions, right? So also we have a 3-time former elected state New Hampshire legislator on board to help you with, I've talked to hundreds of candidates. I can help you with any positions, or, I'm learning a lot all the time, yeah? So once again, thanks for checking out the before we go, I definitely want you guys to share, you can share on the screen to your website or anything else that you guys want to. If you guys have a card, definitely people here to learn about your campaign. Please feel free to share that on the screen. Once again, I'm really thrilled these candidates, the qualifications and credentials on both of these guys is just amazing, yeah?
I think so.
Collins for
Thank you
president.
for the opportunity.
So here's my screen so everybody can see it. It's collinsforpresident.com. And I just hope, word of mouth is really all that we can count on. So if you have student loans, tell everyone with student loans about this campaign, because neither Trump nor Biden have any desire or intentions of actually doing anything on this topic. It's really just us. So own this problem. These are your loans. This is your problem. Help spread the word, and I think you'll be amazed at how far we can take it. So that's collinsforpresident.com. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Susan, what we're doing right now, we're just showing the website and stuff there. If there's anything else, we're pretty much closing it up. So, is there anything else that you want to share with our audience before we go? Maybe a website, anything like that?
Yeah. So, yes, so I'm Susan B. Lahaki, running for president as a write-in most states, and in a few I'll be an independent. My website is Susan4, the number 4, that is USA.com. I am, like I said, in the process of writing a lawsuit to stop the election. So hopefully we will all be able to be a write-in. That's my goal. Even there will be no ballot with names on it, and you will have to write someone in. And so that is my goal, and I hope to bring that change to us for this election. And that's all I guess I can say right now. I didn't know if I could get back in, but I got back in, so that's great.
All right, Emmanuel,
and Alan, I just do want to say that once I'm done with this election lawsuit, then maybe I'll talk to you then about one for student loans. Okay, so I'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Sure.
Emmanuel,
I'd be really happy to do that. Yep.
Emmanuel, ready? You got anything you got to share before we go?
Well, so the website is emmanuelpastreich24.org, and our group, Green Liberty, which is a Green Liberty PAC, which was originally part of the Green Party. It's a sort of but not necessarily. It's a combination of progressives and conservatives, you might say, who backed my candidacy in the Green Party. So our position is quite strong, especially on the three truths. And so I think I'm distinct from the other two candidates in this respect. And that is to say that our primary issue in the campaign is state crimes. There are three state crimes: 9/11, Federal Reserve, fabrication of money, and COVID-19. And that by addressing these state crimes, we're going to address all the other issues, because this is what allows us to seize the assets of the billionaires for their criminal participation in state crimes. And so that's the foundation. I know for some people this is make them a little bit nervous. They're a little bit scared or a little antsy about it. But I think it's a reality that if I manage to get this far on this platform, that it must have something to it. And I appreciate very much that you were willing to include me. A lot of people try and avoid me, and I look forward to learning more from Alan about the student loan crisis, which I support his efforts, and from Susan about the issue about working people, especially the terrible barriers that women face, especially as families and especially children are under attack constantly from multinational corporations trying to induce narcissism, dependency, and essentially destroy our bodies and our souls. Thank you again.
Well, that's a pretty good summary right there, yeah? All right, so I thought we were about finished, but we got a couple more questions in. I definitely did want to cover everybody's. Don't worry, Brian. We're definitely going to cover you before we're done here. Yeah. Wow. There's a bunch of questions coming in the chat. Oh man, how do you guys feel? Are you guys ready? I'm getting a little. I'm petering out right here. How about y'all? I'll be honest with y'all. I'm petering out. How y'all doing? Yeah. All right. All right, cool.
Let's do a lightning round.
A lightning round? Okay, I am mad. Yeah, I want to give it. Let's do it. So. The question says, the first one says, what do you think of ranked choice voting? This is pretty quick. Yeah, yes and no. Yeah, ranked choice voting. What's the deal?
No. I'm okay with it. No opinion.
Okay. Anybody
else?
Yes. Okay, anybody else?
No.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, that's good. Okay. So next part is going to be, what about expanding WIC? You know about women, infant, child, right? Yeah? To the age of 12.
I don't know the details of WIC, I have to admit, because it's clearly not working. So there's no point in looking really into it.
Mother's basic income is something we talked about before, so I'm going to go past that one. What about going state by state to change bankruptcy laws to allow for the canceling of all interest on student loans, including capitalized interest? I mean, that's something that's part of, yeah, she's reading that straight off of Orange's thing, yeah.
Unfortunately, student loans are a federal issue. The bankruptcy laws governing federal student loans are federal. There's not much that the states can do. They can maybe put some in-state barriers against collection companies, but it's a federal thing.
Oh, just seeing this, my co-host from Los Angeles, her name's Lisa. She actually works with Color of Change, a very large organization, and actually they have, she's been working on some state laws with California to try to excuse this, like I think the private loans, they tried to do something with that, so I know she's been involved in that fight. Before we go to, go ahead, Emmanuel.
I was going to say that the lobbying is a large part of this issue, that if you take away the ability of banks and corporations to lobby, i.e. bribe government officials, it's bribery both in terms of donations to campaigns, but also in terms of junkets and opportunities to work for 6 months at investment banks. If you're able to take that away, it will actually make it possible for citizens to participate in the formulation of policy.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. I want to shout out Muti before I cut to like all the people that was involved like making this. Muti right there. So inspirational right there. He's only been 8 months out. I think he was over 40 years in prison, wrongfully incarcerated. The people who testified against him withdrew their testimony, and he still hasn't been exonerated. Just so you know, another guy we work with in Pennsylvania, his name's Vincent Moto. He was actually the first man freed on DNA evidence in Philly, Pennsylvania history. He also has not been exonerated. Actually, Philly is one of the worst states in terms of exonerating wrongfully convicted men, and we're hoping that they could change that like now. Yeah. So shout out to him and Nolan Farrell, who's actually also a victim. I'm sorry he couldn't make it today. So let's before we go to Brian, also about Kori. By the way, just so you know, big shout out to Kori. Without her help, today's event wouldn't have been possible for real. Yeah, so all the work that I took behind the scenes, Kori really was a big part in helping out. So thank you so much, Kori.
Of course, thank you for all the great work you do, Ed, and everybody for speaking today. Genuinely appreciate this discussion and debate.
Okay, cool. All right, Brian, close it down, bro. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I think we lost Emmanuel, but it was great to meet him and Alan and Susan. All you guys, thank you. But we need a completely different strategy to actually deliver change. And so even if one of you was able to overcome the election hurdles to get to Washington, D.C., we've got all the problems with legislation of the legislative branch and the gridlock there. So the political problems are both electoral and legislative. And the American Union is a different model that will address both of them at the same time by crowdsourcing the legislative process and offering one set of demands to the candidates across all 470 federal races and backing them up as a national union of swing voters. This is how we can change our political structure and bring power from the bottom up, bring power to the people. And so check out anamericanunion.com if you want to know more about how we can end poverty and mass incarceration and end the endless wars.
Don't you have a book dropping or something? Where's that book at, man?
The book, yeah. I know none of this fits into a soundbite, so I wrote a novel so you could see exactly how we can crowdsource government and fix our monetary system, form our criminal justice system.
Alan, do you have a book? There you go. Yeah, there you go. I think you're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you. Yeah, you're muted. Susan, you should definitely write a book. You're definitely going on your own adventures. Yeah.
This is the very first book ever to be written to be critical of student loans. So I believe it's still available on Amazon, et cetera, et cetera.
I know, Manuel.
There's a lot of my followers are people who can't read. So no, I'm making videos.
That's right.
So you have to watch my videos, but I read and although I have dyslexia, I do write. And so on my videos, I have over 400 videos on YouTube. You can follow along and find out about me and all my ideas. And then also with the videos, I usually put a little blurb about something. Sometimes it's with the video. Sometimes it's an additional information that might be needed. But so my stuff is free. It's online for everybody to watch and read and look. And yeah, so, no, I don't have a book. I mean, I have a book,
That's all right.
but it's an art book.
Yeah.
So, but it has nothing to do with this.
Well, just interesting. Okay. Well, it was a good program. Thank you so much. I think that's pretty much it. God bless, and hope to see you at the next one. Thanks for checking out the show. All right, so I'm just going to hit...
Thanks for organizing this. It's always wonderful to be here. And I had a great time, and we all bring something to the table. So thanks to everybody